We'll start her up then. This is meeting
meeting
84,
I don't know.
Portal
anything
Mountain
about
Development
that.
meeting
so many
number 84, the Axiological,
conspiracy theories.
the Axiological Conspiracy Part 3.
That,
And so we have already, hold on one sec. I guess that doesn't, well, let's do one of these.
listeners are patiently waiting, Brian.
Waiting. So it's a good topic. We're talking already about did aliens do it? Or who did it? Who did it?
Who done it? Who done it?
Yep. And the axiological conspiracy started thousands of years ago. And it is the conspiracy to obfuscate meaning. Or, sorry, value. The meaning of value, if you want.
Okay.
Right, the connection between the quantifiable and the qualitative.
The very
So-
idea of valuing something. That is what gets interrupted.
So, like gold?
Anything. Sure.
Why did they value gold so much?
Well, yeah, but value in food.
Maybe because it's fungible to the system.
So you can value gold as like this quantifiable deal, but you can also value something like food or a beautiful site as a qualifiable thing. And so we're talking about like how do you connect or disconnect meaning from value to get your versus qualifiable, because value comes from the qualifiable. You start off with seeing things that you like and so forth, right? And then
A quality that you value something, it doesn't mean
Right.
that it's a number or a category.
it's valued because of its meaning. And then you have this other sort of quote unquote value, which is based on a quantifiable because so much weight in gold costs this much amount of currency.
Or it is 1 ounce. 1 ounce of gold, it's worth 2 ounces of gold, or 3 ounces.
Or itself,
Something could be.
when the ounces themselves become the currency, sure. Same idea, but so the disconnect is there's two different types of value, and how does the latter is essentially trying to push the quantifiable ounces to be the meaning within the qualified. So now you
So the system takes over, like, supremacy,
Your-
I guess.
and your mental
And
calculation.
it dictates what's valued,
Right.
what gets valued,
So-
based on numbers coming into your senses.
So what you find beautiful is not valuable to the system. How much work, what hours you put into the system, that's what's valuable to the system. So but that's not meaningful to you. The only meaning for
So
you
labor
is to
transferring
get,
to that.
So it completely obfuscates meaning in the sense that everything you do becomes meaningless and for the sake of this running system, and nothing to do with your living life.
This has also been described as the problem of counting, when the numbers supersede the experience. I guess
the words.
quantity is more important than the quality, because the quality can't be like systemically
Categorized. It's different
calculated.
for everybody. What I find beautiful, you do not, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's objective.
So it doesn't have room for that kind of differentiation. If it's valuable, it has to be objectively valuable. Therefore, it's valuable here and there and there and there and there. Your opinion does not matter.
Everything can be reduced down to a calculation. That's the gist of it, I guess. The whole system can function, whether, like, completely without regard to our quality of experience of the system.
Right, like, for
doesn't
example-
matter one shit. Right?
For example, sending somebody to a battle. How much quality of life are you expecting in a lethal altercation? Does the system care about that part, or does it care about sending more soldiers into more strategic different places?
And you are one soldier.
Right.
So there's that disconnect. What the system is doing is to a very different meaning to you. You're going to experience the pain of it. You're going to experience the hate, the mental stress, the explosions, the ear ringing,
Sacrificing
the
like
sweat,
a small part of
the
the
pain.
system for the overall.
and you're not going to even see
Right.
the system, because that's not what soldiers report coming back out of battle. They report being there for their brothers.
Right.
They're not talking about the greater schemes of the elites. They're in fact condemning them most of the time.
Right.
But they're in theory fighting for our freedoms.
when
It
they
all-
when they
it all
start.
depends.
That's
when
what
when they
the
start,
line
when they
is,
come
right?
back,
It
they're
depends.
they fought for the person.
There's
right
many
next to
different
them.
lines in many different times throughout history where people were pushed into that. But war is the end result of using this. The ego is able to. The ego is like the commodified self, able to interface with this market and calculate.
Selling your work hours for food. That's ego. It's a calculation of self, and ego means that you're taking that self as not as a quality but as a quantity that is worth value on the market. So how do I sell myself? How do I buy myself, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So rather than just a generic self-reference, which we feel and experience as kind of a self, the ego is on top of that, which we can identify with when we commodify ourselves and say, I am an employee, or whatever. Like,
Right.
that's what I am doing. It's the ego that allows that because you're transacting on the market. The
And-
ego is standing in for yourself.
so conceptually,
That's how we use the term
Yeah.
ego. It's
Yeah.
kind of different a bit than
yeah.
how
And
other people do.
conceptually, the ego is the same for everybody. It's that transaction.
Right.
But the outcome of this transaction, because they're always in different places on this market, is what's causing this ego to be worth more, that one to be worth less, and all of that kind of stuff in the quantifiable sense.
Your
Better-
bank account.
better-
Basically,
you're
your
better-
bank account.
or you're a better employee, or your
Says where you are.
review, or whatever. It doesn't matter what the calculation means. That gives rise to what we call an agent. So while the ego is the same for everybody,
Right.
agencies is the thing that is expressing the differences between you, me, and him, and
Mhm.
everyone else.
Right.
So there's a difference between what we say ego is and what agency is, and then self is kind of like before the ego gets sold, if you will. It's the fact of it in the story, more or less.
Interesting thing about agencies is that they can often be filled by other people on a whim. Like, if just because you're fulfilling a management role, say you're a manager, that's the agency, doesn't mean that if you get fired or whatever, someone else can't just do that.
No, it's
take
based
over
off your skill
take
level,
over that
yeah.
exact agency.
Yeah.
It's based off of
So-
your skills and
so,
stuff.
yeah,
your
of
credentials.
course.
The point
Yeah.
is that you're your category, and we kind of picked the terms from two different spots. One of them is the matrix, because it demonstrates that exact scene very, very clearly in the way they present how agents occupy the next body and the next body and the next body.
Right.
So they're utilizing the position of the individual, infect them with the agency, and now that individual functions like the rest of the system. So
Right.
it has that sort of infectious tendency.
Okay.
And this is more metaphorical, of course. We're not talking about actual infections, but in our
Right.
in our parlance, this sort of resonates with what we're saying. In that the way you're behaving is going to be like adapted from, like, I'm a manager. Managers behave this way, so now you're adapting the manager program and you behave that way.
Right.
That removes you from the picture, puts the agency into the picture. You just sold yourself to become this agent.
Mm.
And that selling is the ego, and everybody does that, but the agents that come out of it are all different based on where they are in their space and time.
Right.
And the whole thing together is what we call the ontological matrix. Ontology being like the reality, matrix being how agents interact within that.
Mm-hmm. And that's
a bit
like
of a homage, but
society
not
at
quite.
large. The
Not
yeah,
quite.
everybody has a role in society.
gas
kind of.
station attendant, the banker.
Well, it doesn't matter if the gas
All
station
essential
attendant
roles.
is Mark or Sally, so
Right.
long as it's gas attendant.
Yeah.
That's what we're.
As long as there's
getting
somebody
to.
there to
Right.
fill that position.
So
And
it's
this
made
is
to
how
like
it's-
churn automatically, come in and out. Things can come and go.
And this
the
is how we see
system keeps
people.
going.
So
Right.
this is how we
not
see
necessarily like a uniquely skill-based job, though, right? It's like anybody can basically do that.
Depends on the
that's
agency.
Well, that's how the system utilizes us, because we are a generalist species. We can do that. It's taking that idea to its overdriven and over specializing what is essentially a generalist.
Right.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
But yeah, like say you want to get ahead in this system, You want to
narrow
get
it
ahead
down.
in this system, you're going to take more of a niche.
Yeah, that's the
kind of like.
that's the flip side. It's like, why can't I teach this model the way I talk about it now? It's because I don't want to set them up to be unemployable.
Could be screwed.
You don't want to be like a career fucking
Right.
student.
No, I'm saying I don't want them to be unemployable, so I'm not going to tell them to fuck the system, kind of a deal.
Oh no, of course not.
But you're saying you can't get away from it either,
No,
and I'm acknowledging that. That's
you need to understand how to utilize the system to your advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. And they're always
Nice.
there's always system. People make systems, but this kind of a thing seems to have a runaway tendency for it existing for its own sake, right? Like a company exists to make profit, right? But at the expense of everything, it doesn't care as long as it's legal, right? It's
Yeah, it depends on the business model, I guess.
it's kind of akin to cancer, a group of cells that don't give a shit about anything else outside of itself, right? It's destined for failure. Not a judgment on it, but that's the setup, right? If you don't,
If it's a greedy system, like a greedy corporation that doesn't give a fuck about the working components, sure.
right, and wants to sabotage anything and everything as long as it'll give them a slight advantage,
Right.
right?
That's bound to fail. Yeah, of course.
Right, but there's nothing against that. The law, sure, but then things
But you
get
need the the loyalty and like the participation to have that be a success.
right. It's very That's a point I think Shenya brought up a while ago, maybe even last time, that it's hard to actually coordinate things between people and for everyone to shut their mouths. Like, because if everyone's in it for themselves, if you as a group are trying to screw over society, why wouldn't each individual of you be looking for any way to cut off your buddies
Just being in it
to get
themselves.
ahead,
Yeah.
like maybe take the whole cake
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Yeah. So it's like breeding the wrong kind of mind state right from the start. Like,
Yeah, it's not the system that can. Well, it's a system that will try with blackmail, all that kind of shit, right?
that's what current systems going on.
Like if
right
you
now, I
get,
think a lot,
you get dirt on
I
somebody,
wonder where we got the idea
the
from.
parties.
you make dirt on
Epstein
somebody.
Island.
No, that's all you do, really. Like the only way
Epstein
Make
Island.
dirt on
the
each
only
other,
way
right?
the only way the politicians
didn't-
really talk is by
So that,
saying,
but that does work to some extent, right? Because if you go out of line as a politician, you know that you're gonna get
They've
hammered.
got this blackmail.
it
The
works.
tapes are coming out.
Yeah.
It works.
You're going to jail.
It works with a certain level
You're
of
gonna be killed
quote
before you make
unquote
it
education.
to trial, whatever.
It does work to a certain
kill
level when
Right.
when there is a certain limit to quote unquote education. So when education is limiting your cleverness, if you will. So I'm not talking about education and like life knowledge, but more like education, like how to technical stuff, how to do technical stuff. So if you're not very clever, like logic clever, if you will,
Sure.
then it's easier to spin the web of different mythological concepts and make greater associations between them without really having to justify how you made those associations, right? So if the person's not digging deeper, it's easier to say shit, long and short of it.
Right.
Mhm.
But it certainly starts to fail for differently. It fails at a different way when you start having those educated mind, which is why you
There's
start
like
seeing
a
a divide in like
Degrees of
left
naivety.
and right and all of that stuff.
Right.
It's kind of like leading into that.
Yeah, I think a lot of your capability within society is based off your IQ as well. So, certain people aren't really necessarily mentally capable of assuming these power positions or necessarily the skilled kind of technical areas.
IQ itself has been debunked several different ways, but I do get the sentiment that you were going for.
Generality, right?
Yeah, like mental capacity is not even something that we even know how to measure in a very in any unbiased scientific way. So if we have a scientific way, it's excruciatingly biased.
We do have a scientific way.
But
We
to
just
actually
observe traffic.
Okay, well, that's like saying observe the internet, which is, by the way, another similarity I've noticed. If you take the internet out of the picture for a second and think about how people behave in traffic towards each other, the drive-by communication, well, that's what the internet traffic actually looks like as well. It's like almost an extension of the drive-by. I'm never going to see you again. Fuck you.
Yeah, more
Kind of,
confrontational. People have more courage to say what
you actually
think, right?
So
Whereas
that-
you wouldn't say something to somebody's face like that in
But
real life.
yeah.
You know they're going to beat the fuck out of you.
The car depersonalizes the contact, and therefore you allow yourself more of that leeway. And so does
Road rage and all
so
that.
does
Yeah,
the
exactly.
internet. So there's
Until
actually a
somebody stops and
similarity.
gets out of their car, and then you're like, oh fuck, what do I do now?
I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not saying it's the
Run them
same.
over.
But this behavioral pattern is
Pull out
actually
your
similar.
gun.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it's the same situation, but
Yeah.
the behavioral pattern certainly has a lot of similarities. That are
Yeah,
worth
it
noting.
definitely.
is that even a question?
All I'm
Like-
saying is that it emboldens people.
Because nobody
It probably
actually
shouldn't be.
compared the two before.
No,
to my
no.
knowledge.
Dustin said, "What are you gonna do?" He's getting out of his car. Of course, you're gonna grab the gat.
You're gonna
Pull out my gun.
Well, if you're getting out of your car, I'm putting on the gas in mine, and I mean,
Well, that was my first suggestion. Is run him over.
Right.
like,
Yeah.
not-
But-
this is fight or flight situation at that point.
But people tend to have
Lock
a
the
little bit
doors.
overreactions when there's no real consequences. to
I had-
it,
I had
right?
my first-
or perceived consequences. to
I had
it.
my first
Right,
so-
communication like that this week. Actually,
Same goes for people getting out of their cars.
somebody was really annoyed
Right.
that I was
Nothing can
going the
happen.
speed limit, and so they passed me and they do like one of those,
middle finger.
and I'm like,
Uh,
and they're like, so I go,
yep. Don't fuel the fire.
I wasn't. I was waving at people. I was happy. I was entertained. It was like in the middle of the traffic on the end street. Nobody was going to get out. All right, where were we?
Getting distracted.
Shall we
By
discuss the shitstorm?
Dark mirrors.
Yeah.
Shall we get into the shitstorm?
Which one?
Oh no, it's not actually an official term at this point for us.
Okay.
It's like an actual tornado, where you have left and right being like.
Well, we had the wheel of shit. I think that was one.
Yeah, that's another one where you have like a wheel spinning faster
Somehow
and faster and
we were
faster.
gonna try and relate the two. Maybe that's how I felt.
Well, I'm trying to discuss the birth of a new diagram, basically. So I'm kind of trying to keep it that
Right.
isolated.
And
to
this
that.
was developed. We're talking about left and right wing politics.
left and right with politics.
And the
dream and
tendency you brought up, which was interesting, about the uncertainty principle.
moment. And then completeness.
Politics are divided by, yeah.
Incompleteness on the one end of the spectrum, uncertainty on the other. Not uncertainty, sorry. Incompleteness and contradiction. So, on the right, you
Right.
have more complete yet
We've
contradictory.
brought these up a lot in the past.
Yeah, but not in this language. So on the right, you will have tendency towards completeness, which has which breaks down into contradiction. On the left, you have avoidance of contradiction and locked into incompleteness. So the left does not have a concrete mythology that it can present. The right has a mythology that it presents that fucks over people. Well, both situations fuck over people.
One is under the guise of compassion.
Well, that's the incompleteness part. Like you can have desperate and incompatible compassionate groups
Right.
when played together orchestrate a very incompassionable environment.
Yeah.
So even though individually you cannot accuse any of the participants of lack of compassion because they're really compassionate towards things, but the lack of nuance towards the rest of the inner workings of how this interacts with the rest of the groups causes a shit show that gets everybody nowhere fast.
Right. I'm just saying the compassion is the guys because they're using it to like gain more control and take away more rights. Right? So
there's bills
That's
coming out where
that's
it's
more
like
on the right.
we're trying to protect these fringe groups that are being attacked on the internet. So, da 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 da. Right?
That's-
We're compassionate towards these groups.
That's right.
Meanwhile, it has nothing to do with that. It's more against the freedom of speech aspect of it.
That's right
And
propaganda,
then,
though.
the whole control of
No,
we're protecting you.
this is how
by taking away-
this is the description the right has for the left. Yes, that's
Yeah.
the description the right has for the left, but it doesn't speak to any kind of lack of contradiction, because
I don't know.
the left being as a disparate set of places.
But that's exactly what it's
Lumping
talking about.
them-
It is a contradiction.
That's not the left even a comment. It's an observation on how like governments become step by step more authoritarian. The different ways they could do it. That's the only thing that was cared about there. It didn't even matter who cares whose cause it was.
It's the whole
It doesn't
woke-
matter what the reason was.
woke
Even
ideology,
the
right?
only thing that Dustin cared about when he said that was that the censorship laws are cut, or like free speech is being curtailed.
There's
Things
a-
are clamping down in an authoritarian way. That's all that he cares
So-
about there.
Being
That's all that I
utilized
care about
under the
that
guise
statement.
of
So
compassion.
there's
but
another
it's
problem
not about
here.
compassion.
There's another problem here.
Right, so it's just a false.
There's
kind of
another
flag,
problem
right?
though. There's another problem though. Politics have been moved by basically the last century into a very weird shape, because
Understatement.
at the beginning of the 19th century, you have a really much more clear divide between what is left and what is right. But the problem is that these two groups have been shifting over this last century over to the right, both of them, leaving pretty much a vacant spot on what is
But see,
what,
that-
what, what,
that's-
what would be seen
That's-
as a traditional
hold on,
left.
Hold on.
And
This is a talking point that Dustin would just say the exact opposite. So how are you trying to school Dustin when you're just saying, like, oh, it's everyone knows it's going to politics is all going far to the right, but
Yeah.
you would just say
Seems to
no,
be
it's
going
going far
way
to the left. Everybody knows this.
With all this
How is what you're
gender
saying not just
ideology
a
But it's
talking?
not going to.
How is that not a talking point when it's just Dustin would say the
not just
exact
it's
opposite?
not just a talking point, because there is nothing in
How
the
did
current
everything go right?
there is nothing in the current left that resembles what left was actually about a century ago.
Under-
And a lot of its
with that as
current
a context, like
and with its current talking points, it's actually rephrasing
like
the
freedom
right talking
of
points.
of ideas, of sharing ideas, openness, like the Enlightenment stuff, Enlightenment era, like the scientific method as being respectable, and the open discourse of free flow of ideas.
That's
This
the
is the left, right?
That's the idealistic left. But that now look at the current actual political spectrum and tell me who is espousing those actual ideologies.
Right.
And you and
So Dustin's a leftist
my
because he
problem
wants
is-
freedom of
because my
expression.
problem is that the people that are even saying that they're
Yeah,
on the
that
left,
did
they're
get
actually
Right.
switched. That did
so
get
maybe
switched.
if you
Now,
look at it that
sure,
way,
yeah.
maybe it went right because your ideas are suddenly
Right.
conservative.
Well, before it was more like
in
the
reference to that.
but it was like the outrage of like people talking against the church, right? And that's what they were. The right was fighting against because they were.
Okay, but
trying
that's
to
a
talk about
framing.
their God, right?
That's a framing, because on the left, if I were to say be a representative of for just 2 seconds,
Like you,
For-
like
like, for the
blasphemy
sake of-
laws,
yeah.
you couldn't blaspheme or
I've
whatever.
never ventured out of my way to be like church sucks and it shouldn't be exist or any of that stuff. To my mind, the only thing that the church shouldn't be able to do is go to somebody who's not associated with it and tell them what you're doing is wrong and you should do it our way.
Right.
Like that's the only thought I would ever give the church at all. I wouldn't give a shit if they believe in God. I wouldn't give a shit if they pray. I wouldn't
No,
give a
you
shit.
shouldn't.
There's none of my concern.
Right.
So to paint
Carnal.
the, and if I were to represent the left, and you were to paint the left be these people that are all against the church, well, I'm sorry. It sounds like you're projecting the people that are all for the church, that are against everything else, to be behaving the exact same way towards you. And no, I'm sorry, that doesn't fly.
Sure.
Do you see what I'm trying to say here? It's kind of like taking your mentality, saying these
I don't-
guys
I
are
don't
being
think so.
against me the way I am against them, and
Right.
therefore I am justified in being against them. But you made it all up. The other person isn't even thinking about you until you bother them with your bullshit.
Right.
That's how I would
I
paint
got
that
lost.
picture.
Yeah, I don't know what you're trying to say there, but okay.
Okay. As a person that doesn't think about the
Wait,
church
we didn't
or
define
God,
the right either. The old school left, we kind of defined what's.
So
what's
do you
the
know
right,
where the
just,
terminology comes from?
Traditionalists.
Do you know where the terminology comes from?
What?
The
left and right.
Yeah, the French. The French is it's basically based on entirely on the revolution of the French aristocracy and how it became France afterwards. So on the right of the king,
Then we chop their heads off.
on the right of the king were all of the elite that supported the current status quo, if you will. On the left of the king sat every other legal member of their, I don't know, parliament, whatever the fuck it was, that were presenting a different point of view. And it was,
They were just
I
the
forget
opposition.
exactly the exact, what led to this structure being there.
That's what they set up after the revolution or whatever.
I don't know if, I can't remember before or
one, I
after. I think it might have led to it, actually. The details currently escape me, but the left and right were effectively status quo, progress. Like, that was a division, and the king sat in between the two.
Right. Okay. There are maybe reasonings for that, though. Obviously,
It comes from there.
in the structure's own interest, it would want to conserve things through time,
Much as possible.
but at the same
Right.
time, it must expose itself to new ideas, or it.
Right, yeah.
Which is
So,
what
like,
the left present.
I guess traditionally, like, yeah, the left are the more
So this-
abstract thinkers. They're
Yeah.
not necessarily.
So-
So
everybody
left and
gets
right
the
is a
grain.
machine,
It was
but
supposed to be a concert.
Right.
not like just a reason to hate and
Yeah, like
divide and split up.
Yeah.
but for reasons that are greed, it eventually became us versus them.
Right.
So
In no
so
time
it was
fast.
seen as actually a good idea at one point. Interesting.
But the tendency towards authoritarianism over time pushes everything towards the right, because that's where you find those kinds of structures. The left doesn't suggest a hierarchy as much as it suggests a kind of a flat, interconnected network.
So
That's what gives them the ability to not know whatever the fuck the other person is doing and fuck everything up that way.
I don't know. Seems like the rights or the rights more against like the bureaucracy and creating more.
Vocally,
fucking
yes,
systems
but
like they-
actively, no. Because it sets up further bureaucracies to manage the lack of bureaucracy. So it's kind of like, what?
I don't know about that.
you may,
It literally uses bureaucracy to.
you can kind of mix
to
in
discuss
like
bureaucracy.
libertarianism isn't too far off from the right camps or whatever.
Yeah, it's more about
So
Yeah.
like look at
being like a
Ron
sovereign
Paul
individual.
or whatever.
Well, again-
People just want to like lop the entire state off and be gone with it, and then let everything handle from a bottom up, localized level.
Yeah.
Whatever you can't handle local goes up. Like
Right.
instead of just a big top-down system.
Give each jurisdiction their own.
Just have a
laws,
structure that
like
keeps the law
they can decide on.
where this is open and able to happen. Kind of idealistic, but
Well, and there's the key. As soon as you start going with idealism, you have a top-down authoritarianism structure. And no matter what you try to do, what language
that's
you
why I
use to
said
circumvent it, it's
to
still
keep
there.
the law happening. There
It-
has to be the high-level government
Yeah.
existing in some form.
It's like trying to get rid of the self-reference in mathematics. The more you try, the harder the self-reference becomes apparent. That's the whole Gödel incompleteness.
There's like degrees of
Situation.
coherence, and it's not like those systems have to be there as they are.
And this is not even a knock against or for authority structures at all, which tend to be useful in contexts. Right? Like the problem becomes if they're taken out of context and applied to everything willy-nilly, and it's like, okay, well, you don't need authority to like
Right.
feed your child or any of those kind of things.
Yeah, I think we should define things like better. How we use some certain words in discussion. What you mean or what we mean by left or right, authoritarianism, libertarianism, like what these things
tried to-
could mean, and like
I tried to do that with the throwback to the French.
otherwise, the discussion just gets so like lost. Like,
So-
have you thought of left and right politics in new ways today, just from this discussion? At all? Had different perspective of what it might mean to people?
Maybe whenever he starts talking about how it originated. I mean,
So
it seems to have strayed
yeah,
and switched roles.
Something's
at some point or
changed over
another.
time.
So-
things have morphed.
yeah, and
So
I
everybody
Well, the
has-
Republicans were against slavery.
They weren't.
Uh,
They weren't though.
well-
Historically, that's a lie.
Well, it's not
They
historically a lie.
jumped on that platform because Europe was pressuring the U.S. as
So there was support for the
Republican.
platform.
yeah England
Okay.
and France and all of them. I forget which one specifically. Don't quote me on this.
Why?
Mark.
Because there were still Republicans
No,
who,
they were feeding
who
weapons.
wanted slaves.
They were feeding weapons to the north side of the conflict. The north side of the conflict constituted of people who were slave owners, but politically speaking, if they wanted to have that continued support from the European side, they had to start their political platform of anti-slavery. They did not give a shit about slavery whatsoever. They used that to just for the sake of continuing trade
Gained
with
support from the
Europe.
Europeans.
Yeah, but
It's a gimmick.
did it become law of the land, or
Well,
no?
it did, but
Yeah, and
not,
then
not
did
for the
people-
reason anybody thinks.
And did people agree with it and do it?
Well, yeah.
Okay,
especially,
so-
especially
Must
black
have been the right
people.
thing, though. I mean,
Obviously,
you'd
it
imagine.
wasn't
Must have
like
been the right
you didn't
thing
have
to
a
do.
whole population who was like against this freedom thing or whatever.
No. What I'm saying is that what we see
That's
on
the way you're
paper-
portraying it. You're like, oh, it's just because the Europeans forced them to. Well, okay, it became the law of the land, and there was enough support
I'm talking about the elites.
that's what happened.
But I'm talking about the elites. I'm not talking about the entire swaths of the population of the United States. I'm talking about the very specific people who are involved in that decision making. Those people specifically did not give a shit about slaves one way or the other. They had them. They used them. They only jumped on board with that political segue simply
Yeah,
to continue their arms supply.
They could not have.
So the
They
effects,
could not have made that decision without the support of the people.
right? That comes from
So
comes from the bottom.
I don't
and
get
yes,
what point you're trying to like poo-poo or like.
that these
play
are
down.
not that the Republicans are not the ones to be credited for anti-slavery
Because they were
rhetoric.
still racist slave owners back then,
They succumbed to the pressure.
only
that
because of
came,
Europe.
Look,
They-
well, in the pressure
And the
from
majority
Europe.
They were all like,
people
okay.
agreed with that.
All right,
So-
okay,
No,
yeah.
look,
So it
look.
makes
You're
them
not
all
letting me
racist.
finish though.
All
The
right,
pressure
that's-
from Europe.
It's a new world.
The pressure from Europe obviously is coming from the bottom up at that point. Like obviously the
Do you think
European
the people
parliaments.
care about that? They're like, oh, the Europeans are judging us. You think the people cared about that?
The
when they voted on these
the
things?
common person is generally disgusted with what they see being done to other common people elsewhere. It's not new. It's not a new concept.
Right.
By the time media starts to take over, these news travel, and the common experience becomes the news, and that experience pushes Europe towards a very different stance towards how do you treat people economically. There's slavery in the United States outright. There's covert slavery in the UK, as you know, with the whole service system and all that shit. It doesn't mean that the elites
That's a whole other
aren't.
discussion.
It doesn't mean that the
Slavery
elites are
never
like,
ended, and it's pretty
Yeah.
much everybody.
But the
Yeah.
point is that the public sentiment is changing in Europe. That public sentiment pressures the political sentiment. That pressures the financial sentiment. That allows the U.S. to relieve itself of slavery, but not for the same reasons that people think. Yes, the bottom said no to slavery, but the top didn't give flying fucks about it, and never will, as you're trying to allude to.
Well, that's always going to be the case. The political class.
And the only thing I want to note about the actual left and right situation that I've noticed is from the classical one, derived from the French, is that the window of who's on the left, who's on the right, if you use both of my hands like this being the center, is that if you keep the center where it is, the whole thing just keeps going, in my case, to the right, but in your case.
Pardon.
So everybody's calling each other left and right, but if you step outside of it, all the rhetoric that they have is from the idealistic right, from the inception of left and right. So if everybody is using the same talking points in the same way, then they're not actually expressing the original system. They're just calling it the original system, but are squarely on one half of it.
Right.
Because they're not repeating those points that came from what used to be called the left. They're just repeating the right points in a leftist way, if you will.
History is interesting.
Well,
for-
that's how
for
you
anchoring.
get people to switch sides, maybe. Right?
No, this is how you get dog whistles. Hiding under, so you say one thing but you mean another.
Mm.
That's what a dog whistle is. Nobody can hear the actual whistle except the people who knows to have their ears perked up.
Okay.
And they're not always obviously used intentionally,
No.
and
People
nobody
don't
should
know
be
better.
shamed for using a dog whistle, because oftentimes people will just state like this popular facts or whatever, which support some sort of like xenophobic or anti-immigrant or whatever type of narrative.
Right.
So you'll get pegged just by wanting to talk about a certain statistic or a talking point.
Mm.
And we both
Then
stepped into
suddenly
that shit
you're
pile.
like racist and all this against that. And
No,
You went through that a little bit, didn't you? I mean, I did too. Once upon a time, he was a right-wing rightist, bigot /
being accused of.
yeah.
It's because I brought up George Soros, like just the
Okay.
name, and
Yeah.
like that's it, game over.
Right.
And the funny thing is, one of the people
Like
that
his
was
voting machines, or
one of the people that was so adamant about him like owning up
Forget.
to it is now part of our group and is like very friendly with all of us. So it's not like it all like went to shit because of that. We were able to at least bridge those gaps.
Yeah,
in
that
a
was
lot
the
different
end of
ways.
a long,
It was interesting though. Like the
many sagas.
the person was very adamant, like emotionally adamant that he's in the wrong, and now like we're all friends and buddies, and nobody's
now
nobody's
I know
confused.
To even question the status quo, you're already like a conspiracy theorist and a fucking right wing fascist or whatever.
Who,
Right?
us?
Oh, I'm saying in general. Just that's people are getting brainwashed to believe, right? If you have an opinion that goes against their established fucking narrative.
Here's like red flags for like fascism in general, like that I've been able to pick up. You have like this ideal of the perfect person
Right.
that everybody should aspire to, no matter who you are. That's the perfect. You are not it.
Yeah.
That's the perfect person.
They're wearing a mask and they have a Band-Aid from their booster.
Right.
The ideal, there's light rays shining down on them.
They're
I mean,
the
that's one
ideal
version
fascist.
of that. There's one version of that. The other version of it looks like a guy with a red hat. And
The ideal.
But does anybody even know what the fuck the term means? Right? They just throw it
Fascist?
around so willy-nilly.
fascist
like,
has specific qualities to it that can be
Yeah.
described.
so it started what, in Italy?
No,
In
right. There's different ways you
The
can look at
the first
the term.
government that was addressing itself as fascist, but the idea goes further.
like Mussolini, right?
Yeah. So he started off the official fascist movement, but before that, it predates. It's an ideal. An ideal revolves around a mythology of this uber monk, basically the ultimate person. And the problem with this mythology is that it tries to use history to justify a return to the perfect age, but it converts history into this very weird propaganda machine that describes nothing that actually happened in the history, everything that justifies
It's all just more ideal.
justifies the activity that is currently happening.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing. So you have like this
The
mythology.
ideal person, the ideal society.
The ideal person.
Ideals, okay.
Yeah.
Got
So
it.
that's what's
So
pushed over and over and over as justification
when did
for.
there's
the next-
connection between corporation and state, that some people take that as fascism, right? I don't know.
Authoritarianism, right?
Like the marriage of corporations to do what the state can't do legally.
So we're talking about the means of production. At this point, we have a capitalistic system. This is the difference between socialism and fascism in general, is that the means of production stay with the elite, and the elite now become concocting this state. Right. So you have. Do you remember bourgeois versus?
Proletariats.
Proletariat, yeah, the proletariat. So if the means of production remain with the bourgeois,
The owning class and the
it
working
evolves.
class.
It evolves into the fascist ideology. If it stays with proletariat, it becomes the socialist ideology, and which echo the idealistic left and right, but become a much different version of it. That is, dare I say it, with the Soviet Union, all of this is shifting to the right because of the authoritarianist structures involved. So one is doing it overtly, the other is doing it covertly, but
Is
it's all fascism.
the historical thing like is right inherently authoritarian, or is that just
Yes.
traditionally how things have
Yes,
been doing?
yes, inherently, because the far right, yes.
I
But
mean,
yes,
I'm
but
talking
yes.
left and right dynamics.
So
like
the left,
the
original left and right dynamic also says yes.
like that
because
needs to
the
be
right-
modified, I think.
Because the right
and
is the
expanded.
authoritarian structure that is under the king, whereas the left traditionally is the merchant structure, the people who get there by their own merit and money. So
I
they're
do-
elite in a different sense.
I
They're-
do like the idea, like the split, the divide. So if like right, I got you. Are you?
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Like the right is conservative, and the left is progressive. Because a general thing, it kind of seems to make sense.
Right.
Like how they could work together. Like those things aren't opposed. They
Yeah.
can never be opposed. They're supposed to be working
well,
together.
yeah, one needs the other, right? The other,
Right.
like, you know, one has like a very structured way of thinking. The other one thinks outside the box, right? More progressive ideas, more, you know, just a different way to do
But
things. Whereas,
that
like, the
for-
one is, like I said, is works off of established, you know.
The conservative is conservative of what? Our culture, which is never perfect. It's not perfect when you start, and it will never be perfect.
Right.
But you need to change in order to get towards something better, right? If you're not doing that, I think, what are you conserving? Like
But
we can,
like it could
we
be
know,
degeneracy too.
we know,
right?
like,
It's
we're
like
here-
okay, this is like the moral kind
Right.
of Christian ideologies, and then you get the secular kind of whatever their own motives, and you know it's all about personal pleasure and feeling good in the moment, right?
yeah,
Where it
and
can
we
degenerate even further than that.
we
in
can
other
look to the
ways.
conservative side, or traditionalist side, or whatever, and note that what culture is there, there's a reason for it up until this point.
Right.
Every behavior has gotten is still alive.
Yeah.
The culture is alive with us, right? So those behaviors, we can look at a traditionalist and see, well, this is generally how a lot of people have lived their lives recently, up until this point where we are a generation
Oh, those
that's
fancy ones?
we are alive right now, right? For some reason.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I
So
mean,
something got
these
us here.
religious systems have been running for thousands of years, say,
Right.
not degraded into total
Yeah.
fucking Sodom and Gomorrah.
Exactly, but they've had to change. They've been forced to
Well,
change.
they've evolved and you know
They've been
picked up new traditions. and been-
Hijacked is the
right?
word.
Well,
in many most cases.
So-
now it's like let's recruit people from the LGBT community and try to say like, oh yeah, a woman can be a pastor and this and that, and we need to keep our ranks up.
Those are different issues.
Well, it's in a way an example of them progressing to keep up
yeah,
that.
but these changes have always happened and been happening, and you can't say whether something is good or bad on its face.
I didn't say if it was good or bad. I'm just saying that they're expanding.
Right, you can see the
Through
church
this
is
way.
changing like before our eyes,
Right.
like to this day. So like this left and right thing, I kind of like the conservative progressive labels
Yeah, yeah.
because
That's where-
conservative
that is
begs
the origin.
what are you conserving?
Conserving tradition.
And progressive is like,
What are you
well,
progressing
is
into?
your conservative, is this literally perfection or not? because the world is changing. Like,
Right.
you must progress to. It's impossible. Maybe
So
that's
bo-
why
so
the
both no,
the
that's
party-
That's why they need each other, because
Exactly.
for the new ideas. Also,
Yeah.
let's hold it together and let's actually get things done.
and so the
Right?
entire so if you look at the entire
Yeah.
situation right now, where one side is trying to suppress the other, you're gonna have to ask yourself, is like, well, are they actually doing the left-right thing, or is it just a totally different?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Divide-
It's under the
divide and
guise of sympathy and compassion,
And
but it's really
unfortunately-
more authoritarianism.
And here,
Just
and-
with a
and-
new label.
And here is the problem, is that the suppression is the name and game of the right side of that whole spectrum. Because you conserve by suppressing, right? How do
Yeah.
you conserve something? By not allowing new things.
Right.
also by expressing, you're conserving what is
Sure,
bountiful and
repetition.
coming out.
You repeat what you have.
Creative.
You annihilate the things that you don't repeat. In some
Right.
sense, you keep it pure. That's a purity thing.
Well, things are tried. Things fail, obviously.
Yeah,
like
so authoritarianism would be a
systems,
tendency.
communism, socialism.
Well, DNA.
Right.
DNA is an example of both a conservative situation and a progressive one, because the DNA, at the same time, it replicates itself very, very, very faithfully. But once in a while, a small little change here and there is actually useful.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, it exists, but it doesn't.
It didn't ask
Shouldn't-
for it. It just got introduced into the system, right? And the system was like, "Wait a minute, that's nice."
Yeah, there's always outliers, I guess.
Most things go through the system and get annihilated,
Mm.
but this just that one thing. It's like, that's cool.
Yeah, we'll keep that.
So there's progress and
Right.
conservatism, and progress and conservatism.
yeah.
Right.
They all need-
In
they both
tandem,
need each
in
other.
tandem.
Yeah, of course.
So authoritarianism would be a tendency of the
To annihilate
conservative
progress.
side, a failure of, I guess, a tendency of a failure. Authoritarianism isn't ever a good thing, right? But what is it? Not censorship. Selection is a tendency of the conservative side, or something like that. I don't know. There's probably a whole bunch
just
of
have
words.
people all thinking the
A
same
whole bunch
way,
of-
right?
It's the pruning. It's the consolidation effect.
Pruning.
All the stuff we're indoctrinated into in school.
Well,
Yeah,
yes and
right.
no.
So it
We're being
makes
programmed into workers, basically, right?
We're being programmed into being able to sit still for 8 hours a day. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and then there's the similarities between like the school system and jail system and this and that, right? You know, you have your breaks, you have
these
you
are
congregate
these
in
are
your
links
lunch
that are
areas.
stronger in America
Mhm.
than they
Right.
are elsewhere. But they're all getting stronger at anything that tries to copy America. So Ford
And that's
was
why they were a
Ford-
powerhouse of economy for so long. Now everything's
Ford
getting
is
shipped
famous.
over.
Ford was famous in saying, "I'm not interested in clever workers. I'm interested in productive ones."
Efficient ones, yeah.
That look, the school system is based on Ford factories.
Right.
Ideological.
Let's give them break times.
Yeah.
Let's give them coffee
It's
breaks.
like a Prussian-
coffee breaks to improve the productivity.
Prussian
that was
system.
also a part of the whole,
Yeah.
right?
So this one is another one that tends to lean towards the fascist part, which is essentially like fascism is effectively the culmination of constantly moving to the right, like taking the entire political spectrum and moving everybody to the right of it. So you no longer have ideological leftist, so to speak, rhetoric. You have leftist rhetoric rhetoric disguised as leftist rhetoric.
Can we
On that side.
Can we
And then on the far end side is what you use to justify that there is a left side, because, hey, look, this rhetoric is not so extreme.
Yeah.
And then that gives the impression that the right is like just the far right and the left is everything else. But no, this left is in particular is actually all the way right.
Like a more palatable slavery.
can we make a distinction
Between
about conservatism and progressivism as like artificial poles of like this is like
Gödel's theorems.
yeah, like our more academic and proper way of doing things, like that'll be
Sure.
our term to use that? And when we say left and right, we're talking like ideological,
Should I describe the
Capture.
spectrum more nuancedly?
if you want. But
So-
you agree with that?
Yeah.
When we say conservative, we're not going to rail on the right wing or fascists or like go like that.
No, no, we're using
talking-
loosely.
We're using conservative, capital C, as a term.
So the original French setup.
Right, and
Ish.
possibly modified to just be more generic in that you're traditionalist. sort
So,
of.
so right off the bat, I'll just have to admit that I to get to like the real nuanced aspects of that, I would have to do more reading on the original
Yeah, for
system.
sure. It's just
so I'm
a
not
sketch.
I'm not informed enough to make like solid
And then
claims.
progressive would be the other side, instead of saying the left. Or
Yeah, but
we can talk about progressive in a
And-
constructive model.
And
fashion.
the academic nuance there would be that we're not giving any side a preference because we're seeing an issue that both run into. And that's like why we're going to the Gödel theorems to talk about those limitations. So
Right.
on the one hand
Yeah,
side,
that's interesting. It does match up. Conservative, you're holding on to stuff. You're having a feeling of a certainty in what you know, your knowledge, your
Right.
tradition. It's worked for sure. There's that's feeling of certainty,
and completeness.
completeness.
Right.
On the other side, we have kind of the opposite.
Yeah,
That anything
so-
is potential. Everything is potential. We could possibly
Let's
do this
try
or
it.
possibly
Yeah,
do
that's
that.
right.
So
The
just-
progressives
Good
go
work.
go into the potentiality.
Just to like not keep you confused, the theorem, it's a mathematical theorem. The Gödel is the person to do this. Gödel, sorry, I keep using a very English way of reading it. Gödel, what he did was he noted that mathematically speaking, when you have a system that makes assumptions, and then there's logic that move you from one assumption to the next assumption to the next assumption to the next assumption, and so they're called formal systems. He noted that you can have a system that becomes more and more and more complete, i.e., describes things about the world, but within it you'll encounter contradictions. So you'll have statements that are both true and false.
Mm.
And
Right.
that's a mathematical inescapability. On the flip side, you can avoid the contradictions part, but you will never have the complete system in place. You'll have smaller pictures of
Because
it,
of variables.
and not necessarily true, because that true and false, if you complete the system, will become apparent.
Right.
So what we're saying is that as you go right, you get a more complete picture that starts to contradict itself. On the left, you get a less complete picture, disparate groups that have their own truths, but if you pull them all together, they'll start contradicting each other and therefore also create a problem.
Right.
So neither side is safe to be in.
Sure.
It's not about
Well, there's
that.
going to be contradictions.
But
yeah.
each area on the left, you would say, within its own thinking, is not contradicting itself.
Mhm.
Yeah, you jumped ahead. I don't think you probably should have.
Yeah,
right
no,
there,
no.
but
I was trying to figure out how to say that properly, and I guess I failed.
It's interesting how, to me, this relates to the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is like
You
if,
could know velocity. or
if
not.
you're
Mhm.
measuring an electron that's floating around like a proton, there's a cloud of probability like where it can be. You can either know like for certain where it is, but then you don't know what direction it's going or how fast it was traveling, or you can know its speed and like its velocity or whatever.
but not where it is.
But it's like it could be anywhere in this general area
don't know
or
two at the
of
same
probability, right?
Yeah, and the more you go for the one, the less certain the other one becomes.
So you can never know like exactly where an electron is and what like direction with what speed it's going.
And that's another like mathematical limit. So we're not talking about like lack of technology that can't pry into this. It's saying that even with the correct technology, the physical reaction that will happen will ensure that this is the outcome. So no matter how much you try to read that fucking electron's position, its direction is going to be unknown.
Yeah. The more precise you get,
And
the
the
less known is the other
And
variable.
the reason being is that the more precise to get more precise, you got to shrink what's called your wavelength to observe it, and when you shrink that, it means you feed it more energy. So when you feed it more energy, and you hit that particle,
Right.
the less certain you can be about where it's going to go next, because you fed it even more energy then. So you collided with it even faster than it's been. You don't know
Yeah,
where it's
right.
gonna
You
go.
just know nothing about it anymore, almost,
Hmm.
except where it was at that moment.
So either you can triangulate low energy pulses over time and kind of have a fuzzy picture of where it is, but knowing where it's going, or you can zoom in and then blow it out of the water entirely.
Right. So this is how left and right wing politics have been divided.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
physics.
Like the
For the-
most
for
the
the
most
win.
fundamental divide and conquer literally goes down to the atom level, atomic level.
Well, we won't make the claim that this is the same thing. What we're saying is that there's a mapping, there's an isomorphism, there's a way to understand one in terms of the other. The picture is similar, the outcomes are about different things.
Right. Right. Yep. You said you had some thought on to describe or explain.
Well, I think I was trying to do that with spectrum. So if we're planting right and left, then we're going towards completion and contradiction on the right, and towards incompleteness and well, what's lack of contradiction? What's the antonym for that?
Cohesion.
That'll do for now, I guess.
Something like that.
Something to that effect, yeah. If there's a better term, I'm sure we'll find it eventually.
Anyways, on that note, I'm out.
Yeah. We'll put you in the
Bored you.
credits. We'll put you in the credits for that.
do some
Hey,
things
man.
in real life.
Cheers.
Got some yard work to do.
Hey, don't leave us
Clean the
hanging.
house, clean my car.
Don't leave us hanging, bro.
Oh shit! Oh shit! Don't do that. Yep.
Don't forget to rage against that machine, brah.
Oh man.
Yep.
I started to get back
Fuck
in.
you! I will do what they them tell me.
I actually started getting back into them recently. It's pretty fun.
What's that?
I recently got back into them, like just for shits and giggles.
Listening to the old shit.
Yeah.
There's
there's no new shit.
Well, there's Prophets of Rage, and then you know some other side stuff.
Primus has been my main go-to lately for some reason. I knew about them since
Cool shit.
I knew about them since forever, but man, just getting into like Clay's playing style
Oh yeah. Pretty wild. He was revolutionary, man.
is
Still, yeah. Yeah, he's
He's-
still got doing different side projects.
yeah, it's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Have you ever listened to Ween? Ween, they do all kinds of different stuff too. They're,
No, I haven't heard of them.
Yeah, check them out. They do almost every genre.
A long time ago, I thought
Nice.
I heard of them.
Ween, yeah. Yeah, they're awesome.
Well, Primus is old too.
Laters.
Primus is like from the 80s.
Yeah. I was going to update the one of these chats, YouTube chat. Housekeeping.
No. Thanks, though.
Oh yeah. So that's the axiological conspiracy in a nutshell.
Well,
Or this is
Almost.
our current milestone.
almost. We only discussed like left and right, but we didn't actually do any of the juxtaposition stuff. Because left and right in this case are solipsism, objectivism, the entire ideological spectrum, the spectrum of stupidity. There's all
Yep.
that stuff to get into to like actually give it a conspiratorial element.
The SOS.
And then there's like this whole question of the tether, that object commodification, the charlatanism that's involved there. They get presented as left and right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So lots of things.
It always seems so. Yeah, that's why I wanted to make that distinction, so we could talk about conservatism as our own appropriation and be like, well, this is a reason for this or that, but in the right or the right wing, it's we can talk about the charlatanism and effects through like this harsh political lens.
It's to take the idea of conservatism as a principle of nature itself, and by that I mean like the way DNA
So what I'm trying to do,
is being conservative.
Like something is repeating. That's all
Right.
that it is.
Faithfully repeating.
Right.
Versus the notion of the need to adapt and change and reflect the actual external environment as it changes without any like notion of whether the fuck it's doing to itself. Right, like so the environment changes
Right.
around you, not because like you decided it should change.
And that's what gives the progressivism its essential natural source.
Right, it's the thing that
'Cause
lets
you must change. The inside and the outside have to reflect as a dance.
Right, for example, if you have 4 seasons, right, as an organism, you have to progress from season 1 to season 2 to season 3 to season 4 to season 1 to season 2 to season 3.
Right.
It's a constant progression, even though it repeats itself.
And as an animal, your hair can just shed itself off normally. Like you don't have to even think about that. It's been conserved already that
Now-
things change in certain ways.
Now imagine you find yourself a little bit southern than your predecessors. 2 seasons. You use the 4-season adaptations to iterate over the 2 seasons as best you can, and correct body plans will adapt. Progress into a new repetition, conservative repetition. So from conservatism to conservatism,
Yeah.
as it were, through a progression.
And yeah, progression could be over terrain to different lands, like
Yeah.
you said, different environments. Right, things change. So we're talking about our neurochemical operating system,
Right.
which is running like within our body all the time and needs to have that relationship with the outside world. It can't just be what it thinks is already right and true, and that's it. There must be some, because things change. How can we ever know what's...
Well, what happens to a species that is inadequately equipped for the environment that it finds itself in? What
Right.
generally happens to it?
the Darwin Award is received.
Hence. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, yeah.
Hmm.
So it's not a speculation situation. It's more like just describing what is already known
Right.
in this context.
Yeah, so we can look at progressivism and conservatism within the model in a favorable light.
Right.
And if anybody gets pissed off, we have to refer them back to this episode.
Yeah, and
Which they will.
this isn't a centrist position, would you say? Look, we're not talking about a compromise. We're talking about
No.
a dance. If you, I'm trying to find a better word for this right now.
It's a collapse of the political landscape.
It's an interaction rather than
Right.
than a compromise.
Yeah, what could be said in the middle isn't so much a thing as a relationship.
Right. So we're not discussing a centrist position of full.
Not a separate position, it's the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Between left and right. It seems that like it just seems like it sounds right. At
It
least.
should go. It should go together. Yeah.
Seems normal.
But it doesn't, because the commentary that we have about like the expression of it, the charlatanistic juxtaposition that we're looking at, is I like to now call it, is that there is a left and right, and they are diametrically opposed to each other. However, this entire storyline, this entire mythology, can squarely be placed on the conservative side. That places us versus them into its mythology in general. So long as this mythology gets repeated by both sides that claim to be left or right, doesn't really matter. This is where we get the aposanus and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You're kind of talking like almost like a fact of memory, a function of memory that is that things are conserved, puts them on the right side automatically.
Well, As a function, yes. As an ideology, no. Right? Like, it isn't fair to place somebody entirely on the right side simply because they've utilized an authoritarian structure or a hierarchical structure, if you will, for a specific task. It's just an admittance that those things interplay. Right? So you can't judge isms based on proclivity, if you will. Is that the right word?
I don't know what that means, but
Things you're inclined to do. Like, you don't necessarily move off of a strictly authoritative structure if you decide to do something that an authoritative structure dictated, because that information could have come from non-authoritative structures. So there is no clear-cut way to delineate
yeah.
the left and the right in this context. You can only delineate
yeah,
it
but I
in
think
suppression.
that's maybe why we've appropriated these terms, I think. Because the conservative has a completely different function from the progressive.
To put it another way, your brain is not necessarily the leader organ of your body in the sense that it's also composed of the exact same cells that the rest of your body is composed of, and therefore is subject to the same demands that the rest of your body is making. However, it's not going to be your leg that says move your arm. So there is an authoritative top-down structure within the body, and at the same time it's not top-down entirely, because that arm must bring food to the mouth so that the brain has sustenance.
Yeah.
So there is this interplay between the two.
There's always that tendency, the feeling of need to justify I lost the word.
Quantification.
No.
But yes, but no. Not in this case, anyway. Anyway, you hold on to that thought. You'll probably get back to it if it's
Perhaps.
very relevant. You'll come up with it again. We should probably start to dig into the tether diagram and start to develop the idea, because I have like a center point, but I don't have a way to like formulate everything I want with it. And one of the things that I've been really getting into is this metaphor of cart before horse sort of situation. So the horse being the driver, right?
Mm-hmm.
The source of any motion to begin with, but it cannot see where it's going.
So the dream
cart's in
getting
front
ahead
of
of
it.
the moment.
So imagine this poor horse not wanting to run anybody over, not seeing anything in front of it, being directed by this cart, and not having a choice in saying, I can go, I can stop, right? So there's a situation where the cart runs somebody over, and the horse, after the fact, has to like look under its feet to see the poor sap's fate.
Right.
So this is the kind of situation I want to paint with being tethered.
It's also more difficult to steer.
Exactly. So, how does the cart steer? It follows the road's tracks. It doesn't even have a choice as to where it steers, and the horse can only go forward and stop and forward and stop, so it can't fix anything in front of it.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
a
put
good
the-
metaphor, yeah.
And if you put the horse in front of the cart, you can steer the cart away from the track.
Right. Cool, okay, yep.
And walk around an obstacle. That's chaos order chaos. That's diagram of like the tree wave.
Right.
That's that.
And with that, let's take a short break. it's kind of tricky to talk about temperaments. So you're talking like devotional as having a clear pathway for being deceived through like idol worship.
Yes.
Devotional is idol worship.
And given our commentary previous to this, like years and years and years previous, devotional is the boat where practically everybody finds themselves in. With the eye diagram and all
Right.
of that stuff.
Like let's say a clear, vast majority.
Right, so even though everybody that gravitates towards the I, which is the pragmatic, and devotional, and they kind of feed into each other, there's still another push of, let's say, percentage of likelihood
Still way more
towards
devotional than pragmatic.
Right. So there's that push within that.
Right.
So that's what it's leaning primarily on. And once you have this outnumbering of people, that can pour out in a very aggressive systemic disposition, because it relies on the adversarial to do most of the grunt work, if you will, not having to deal with it directly itself, to moving towards the callousness and just directing the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of stuff I've
Because
mentioned at the same time, but yeah, I think you're fine.
reification of ideology is very easy, of myth and all this, very easy to adopt, and then you just make simple calculations.
Right.
Like, this sign happened, therefore that person's bad, I'm going to attack them. This one did that, they're going to be rewarded. Boom. All based on your myth, your belief system.
Yeah. Those people just have to fit certain categories.
And the cognitive alignment window being having two positions. One could be called normal mode, or we've had names. The other one, debug, I've said sometimes.
Yeah,
It's kind of like step back mode.
So if you remember how within like the big diagram, the big circle diagram, you would have those peaks going up and down that I have only one set of concentric circles represent. It's kind of like locking one into a specific peak and just having them judge anything else from that context, never switching the context.
Right.
That's what it prevents from doing. Like, your mythology becomes complete.
And this is a common mistake, I guess, for any temperament. Will be prone to doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, devotional is just a segue.
No matter how you start
or
it
gateway.
off.
So the devotional temperament, which exists within all of us, is the segue into charlatanism as such, at least in this sense. There's also scientism and all of those kinds of things too, but those are on the extreme ends of the spectrum.
Right. And it's the most concrete. It's the myth is provided by an ideal object of devotion.
Mm-hmm.
This ideal object, that's the way that it should be, and that's how information is socially transferred between each other. We talk about the ideal object.
Yeah, and to quote unquote prove that, all I can say is that we have the Buddha, we have Jesus, we have the professional, we have all of these different names for the ideal individual that everybody should strive to be.
Right.
Right? That at the cost of their living, breathing experience, if you will, sacrificed for that ideal. So yeah,
Right. Which could be just a higher part of yourself or whatever.
and in that ideological stance, there is either you're on that path or you're not on that path, and that gives a very clear us versus them delineation. So devotional has
Right.
its weakness in that regard.
Right. Mm-hmm. Because it's not really very effective if it's under constant analysis. The cognitive window has to be normally aligned.
To deep down below the
To
narrative.
run
to
that-
deep,
to
to
run that
dig
myth.
below the narrative itself, with the memetics involved, which isn't allowed to be happening. It's punished within the framework.
Typically. Typically.
Well, you're so in doubt now. How dare you? Must be killed.
right? But it's must be a dance.
Yeah,
Non-contradictory.
From our perspective, yeah.
Both are correct.
So, cylinders. Are we into cylinders today?
I think so, as long as they're like, ideal.
Do we have a clean sheet of paper to draw on?
No.
That would help.
We have this horribly scribbled one. I was thinking, okay, we could use that if you want to sketch.
Nice. So, I have some initial ideas, as I said, conceptually. They're incomplete, though. But it's a good starting point. So it's kind of like...
Kind of like this sphere.
cylinder.
Okay, so we're going to draw a circle. Apparently I've made lots in this particular file. So you said there was an inner cylinder. Okay, I'm just going to go with what I thought I heard you talk about before. It's my favorite plane. Why am I going this way? I'm going to build one right here. Okay, so we build this. And then I believe there's a, you said there's like there's a cylinder in the center.
Yeah, this is it. See?
It's like a pillar. And then
Yeah.
I guess I can go off that too. But so what happens in these cylinders?
So I tried to...
Did I draw it right?
It's kind of hard to fit it all into
Is
there.
it this?
Yeah. Well, the inner cylinder can go all the way to the boundaries of the outer one and vice versa. There's no need for a space between.
Then how do you distinguish between the two?
Just one separating wall. So if... Yeah, now you have three. Just make that into two. So combine this wall with this wall.
So just have one cylinder with like a tiny offset?
With a center cylinder. Look, a shaft. So if you create a cylinder with a shaft and then put a solid object into that shaft,
Okay.
that's what you have.
Okay, I guess. That to me looks like a different thing, but let's go like that.
Wire enclosed in a
We're gonna
casing.
have something, and then just like very close.
Yeah. I would have made them more...
Even closer?
No, I would have made them more like attached here, but it doesn't matter. Like
So
it's
like
still an outer
midway
shell.
between this and that.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter. Like the idea is the same.
Okay. The world's our oyster, man. Okay, so we'll do one like, this is our outer.
Yeah, go back closer to the center.
Wait, I'm just putting the outer ring. And then you want one like just midway, like that.
No. The outer ring's edge should touch the inner ring's edge.
What?
Imagine a wire, copper wire, sheathed in a plastic case. The plastic case touches the wire.
Okay.
So there's no space between them.
So then how do you just don't distinguish between the two then?
Except like a center line in the middle. So halfway, radius, take the radius of the outer circle, divide it in half, and draw a cylinder in there. Half that. half the outer circle.
Half? Like halfway?
Yeah. Up to here, yeah.
That's halfway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the outer cylinder is all of this. The inner cylinder
Okay, so
is
get
all
rid
of
of
that.
this line,
Yes.
which isn't too convenient. Oh yeah, there you go.
There it is. Like that.
Okay. But then,
Now you make them cylinders. One inside the other.
can they be slightly offset
Sure. So you can pick them out, yeah.
so they can be distinguished? There you go.
So the inner one is moment.
Right.
The outer one is dream. Moment, dream. The left side is past, the right side is present. There's an arrow. So this cycles like a typhoon. And the past being regret, into future anxiety, anxiety feeding into regret, regret feeding into anxiety.
Interesting. Well, they're doing their
Yeah.
planes again. My planes.
And this is basically as far as I got.
Oops, no, that's this isn't exactly working as I expected. Well, anyways, I'm just messing around.
Yeah. I think you're getting the idea though.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. Past and future, did you mean?
Oh, yeah. Past, future, the moment being the present, sorry. So the inner cylinder
Here we go. We're getting somewhere.
is the present. The outer cylinder is the moment. And the outer cylinder is the dream. The inner cylinder is the moment.
It's gotta be like smaller. 10 inches high, holy crap. Dream. Okay, we'll go right there. Oh shoot. There's our dream. Getting there. Just their
And then
scale's
there's-
a bit off.
As past moves into the future, regret moves into anxiety, but then there's a secondary arrow going back in time from anxiety. From anxiety to regret.
Right.
So it's all spinning on that axis, on the horizontal one. So past anxiety.
Spin-a-majig.
Yeah.
I don't think this is gonna work. Can I write on the surface?
No, don't add that. Don't add that.
Just one.
One, and then another one on the other side of it.
Well, how are we gonna see that?
Well, you made it into 3D. Now you gotta be correct.
Okay, over here.
Yeah, just duplicate that arrow.
Let's see. Like this way, same direction. Wow.
And then the arrows are going from regret into anxiety and anxiety into regret.
Hope nobody's got dizzy. I'm sharing. Okay, anxiety and regret. How can work in this?
Past is anxiety.
Should just
future
put
is
them
regret.
underneath, kind of thing.
Sorry, past is regret.
Right.
So you regret what happened in the past, and that drives your anxiety for the future.
Na 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 na.
Okay, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. Now you turn the whole thing around on the horizontal axis to follow the arrow.
Wait.
Yeah, same way, but on the other flip side of the cylinder.
there's no way I'm gonna.
It's fine. It's fine the way it is.
That should work though. Okay.
Yep, and the same on the other side of the
But
cylinder.
do we have to go like over here?
Yeah, way over there. Feeding, like, just like that happened before the arrow, this happens before the arrow.
Okay, so should future be more over here then? Or it kind of
Like
is
wrapping
already?
around the cylinder, yeah.
Okay, so it's supposed to be continuous, sort of.
Yeah. Now you're getting it. So that's the vision, if you will, for this.
Okay, anxiety was our next. Yeah, right. Regret, anxiety. Wait, I guess we want it like that.
Mm-hmm. And then you want to just...
Okay,
and round it goes.
we're kind of there.
The past could be wrapped around the cylinder like the future was.
Well, you actually can see this diagram from one view. if you read backwards. This arrow could be maybe up a bit.
But you're getting the gist, right?
Yeah, I think it's working.
Mentally.
I think it works. Shoot. Just need it to be almost there, I think.
So, question. Does this reminisce you
Oh
of
boy.
anything within Buddhist parlance as
The wheel,
reincarnation?
right? Oh no.
Oh God!
Of destroyed. Something got destroyed. They got sucked together here. It's okay. How can I just delete this one plane? I can't, I guess. No. Don't do that. What even happened here? Look at that.
I don't know, but I don't want to spend time solving it.
It's
Maybe
okay.
maybe undo things.
No. Never undo.
Anyway, this is like the start
Right?
that I want to explore.
Sounds good to me. Don't mind me. Okay, so we made a chart.
And that's our typhoon.
Just gotta move it all. Not you. Oh God.
So, any questions about this particular setup? You seem to be on board with it, so I'm not trying to.
I think we've done something magical here.
So this is the structure I want to show as a tether. So the tether, obviously being a rope-like structure, if you were to elongate said cylinder, and I'm not asking you to do this, but say you were to elongate it, you can imagine something fixed to the bottom of it and something fixed to the top of it.
Top of what?
The cylinder.
With this thing? Okay.
Yeah, so you can imagine the cylinder being like a rope
Sure.
that tethers two things together.
If it's spinning, like there's an axis, there's got to be some kind of mounting system. So what does that signify?
Whatever comes out of the bottom of the moment feeds the winds of the top of the dream.
Okay.
That's one image to take away from it. From the moment to the dream. But dream feeds the moment.
Right. Okay. There's also this shitnado idea.
That's a juxtaposition. So that's like taking a similar looking cylinder and drawing like a overlay of it, but changing all the names
Right.
around.
So you could kind of see it as like the inner cylinder is like the eye of the storm, where everything's calm, maybe, potentially, I guess.
Well,
And the wall outside that just keeps spinning, and I guess usually
So the moment always presents the same constituents: the self versus other,
proximity
pain
complex,
pain or pleasure,
affect.
and move that through the rest of it to create the next moment for the dream. So it's always kind of fixed in that sense. That's why it's
Right.
unmoving.
Right.
And why the meditative state, if you will, is unmoving as well. All of that stuff is really.
And with that, we shall take a short break.
Up in the sky.
Right. Some new arrows from the bottom.
Sorry, concrete on the bottom, narrative on the top.
Right.
Those two layers. So we're on that one horizon. We're trying to describe that horizon. This is the description of that horizon.
Uh-huh.
So from the moment you feed from the bottom of the moment into the dream, rises to the top into the narrative. So two words are coming up. Layers, OS layers. Over here we have our,
Right, that's what you mean by bottom or concrete.
yeah, here, like this plate, this part of the cylinder itself, this layer of it is concrete. Narrative. So narrative being like the thing that feeds the myth back into the moment, right? Narrative gets transposed onto the myth gives the narrative the next continuation, that continuation becomes the next stage of the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So on and so forth.
Narrative is like the final calculation of what's going
It's
on.
the medium. It's the medium for which the myth
Based
projects
on
itself in.
the worldview and everything and what's
Yeah,
happening.
That's what this is doing.
Told in a sentence or a paragraph.
Right. So we're seeing a cycle going from the bottom up and top down. The myth pushes top down through the narrative. The concrete pushes back up through what's happening. Right? Because just because the narrative said something doesn't mean the concrete will adjust to it. For example, if you try to talk about ghosts and aliens, you know, the concrete level might actually have something to say about it. Just saying.
Sure.
So we have that.
Right. Yeah.
And now we can use that to describe tether and the horizon.
So this first axis we put on here is really from stupidity, I would guess, right? How things keep getting mixed in.
Well, this is just a raw
Neurosis.
interplay,
Right?
and it
Past,
can go
future
either way.
anxiety.
This
We're
could go
talking-
either way right now. Like this system that we've created could be hijacked to charlatanism, or work as
Right.
quote unquote
But you
design.
shouldn't generically be getting regret or anxiety, but as a default, as an default object.
Regret could be something that you incorporate into into yourself, or regret could be something that you feel the affect of, but do not identify with. You can isolate this as a feeling of regret in your meditation, and then follow through as to why it is a regret, rather than what am I regretting and what should I do to avoid my anxiety. So you can still recognize anxieties and regrets in the isomorphic sense. It's the same way as identifying pain and pleasure as features of affect. On the one hand side, they can feed into the into the punishment and reward narrative. On the other hand, there could just be identified an instance of affect that occurred here, it was pain. An instance of affect that occurred there, it was pleasure.
Right.
So there's that difference.
Yeah.
There's that difference in approach, but the system, the swirling mechanism is still about the same. We have an example of this also appearing in our ontological matrix diagram, where we have the ontological matrix sitting in the center. On the one side we have a holonic system, and on the other side we have the market system. It's the same sort of problem, or same diagram, if you will.
I was kind of imagining what you're saying as like another layer-looking disc.
I haven't imagined it that way.
Just, I know you put like in just an arrow going down, but like as a concrete
but
thing.
if you viewed both of them from the top, it's like they blend into each other, as if they're both saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So That way you can have the bottom masquerade as the top by seemingly presenting the same structure but weaving it into regret and anxiety rather than to moment and dream. On the one hand is dream and dream, on the other is moment and dream. Okay, this I don't understand.
The text has been obscured too. I was just imagining the like concrete and narrative as kind of solid feeling areas, but
So, narrative is the layer where, to put it another way, you know how the mind is divided into the six senses, five of which are immediate, the sixth one, the mind, is like a post-processing
yeah.
sensation. So it's still a sensation.
sort of a quantification structure.
Exactly. So that's the separation. There's like the experience itself,
Right.
and then there's the words of the experience, and only the words of the experience is what we're able to convey, which is why everything gets pushed to the narrative side of things instead of the concrete. So all of the concrete experiences are quantified and qualified through whatever narrative is approaching. So you can't escape the concrete being kind of like shaped by narratives, dissection mechanism, if you will, into categories. Right? So even concrete experiences are expressed through narratives. So you can't escape that situation.
Right.
You got to feed it back into the dream to make sure that the moment responds properly. And to do that, the dream has to be isomorphic to what? The model, which is what we're trying to draw up here. I think this is all stuff you knew, but this is a good picture to think about, isn't it? Like this typhoon sort of situation.
Sure, yeah. Just didn't quite get the next arrows that you wanted.
Don't worry about that, because then we'll just waste all of our
It's like
time
from the inside
doing
to
that.
the outside,
Did you get the main picture in your head?
and then we're going from the outside to the inside, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a hurting arrow. Fuck.
Good enough.
It works.
I'm not gonna cry.
From some perspective. It must work from some perspective.
I don't want to be bogged down with drawing.
Yeah, I know. But at the same time,
It's gonna waste most of our time.
well, I mean, you can keep explaining it if you want. I just wanted to have this arrow went like madly wrong.
Yeah, forget about it. Do you know what it means?
Yes. Okay, there we go. So we have a relationship between the dream and the moment.
Yeah.
That's great.
And we have a diagram to distill how that gets built up, right? And with our dream moment diagrams. So you know what we're talking about here, like square by square by square by square. You get the string, and this cylinder is the representation of that string of moments. But it's a kind of a weird string because it represents narratives of the past, the present, and the future all at the same time, which is what juxtaposes itself upon the next impression of the moment. It's that attribution of everything at once. Concrete!
very concrete.
No, you have to say the C very, very quietly. Concrete. The way you have it capitalized.
Right, I did. Narrative.
So really, this diagram is literally the line in the table that we have for the cognitive displacement window. You know how we have two horizon lines?
Yes, there's a top, upper, and a lower.
Yeah, and there's a window that can move from mimetic abstract concrete to abstract concrete narrative.
Right.
That's the discrepancy window. So that horizon that this is all straddling is this what this diagram is meant to express. How the
This
interaction works.
Diagram.
Hey man, that's
Diagram.
It's not my work.
Good times.
This image.
I build my skills best under pressure.
You see what I'm saying about the image, though, right? It's like, it's crystal clear that there's a central element, then there is an outer element that cheese it, and everybody sees the outer element, not the inner element.
Typically.
That's the discrepancy window part.
Right. It's like as a generic human being, you born as a baby, don't have much content in this swirling outer layer, but eventually, through using that inner moment, which is always available in there, and continues the process since birth till death, using that facility, the outer wall of the dream is built up. What is
Right.
real? What is reality?
So you would
And
argue
that has its own momentum to it, and we keep we get traumatized and all this. There's neurosis, there's psychosis, ideological capture, and charlatanistic pitfalls everywhere.
So an interesting observation I just now had
Okay.
is that the system as we are describing it now, like the runaway system, the dysmorphic system, would work towards thickening the dream cylinder. So expanding its walls to be thicker and thicker and thicker,
Right.
isolating the moment
To
away,
crush the moment.
isolating the moment away from everything else surrounding it. Whereas in the model, as we are speaking about it, the effect would be the opposite: the thinning of the dream wall to the point of where it only serves a kind of rudimentary
Formalities layer.
yeah, a rudimentary sort of yeah, like you're saying,
Like handshakes.
Exactly.
You meet somebody.
Besides the
That's
point.
it.
It's besides the point. It's a method to. It's a means to an end rather than an end unto itself.
Right. You must do the secret handshake.
As opposed to these secret handshakes is. By secret handshake in this case, I would mean like planting a plant will give you food, versus, not planting the plant and hiring somebody else to do it, which could or could not yield food.
Right.
Thickening the direct interaction.
Right. Mediation, intermediation, layering.
Correct.
This is the ontological matrix gets bloated.
So the model presents itself as the thinnest possible layer between the two systems,
Right.
which also
Sure.
happens to be isomorphic with the trade guild.
The bare minimum.
In fact, the trade guild and this particular way of thinking have to be like one and the same.
Is like the
That's what it's a
trade-
membrane for.
Trade guild is interested in like pruning the ontological matrix.
If you will, if you were to take this picture as the guild, so the inner part, the inner circle is the guild, the outer wall is the trade guild, and what we want is it to be as thin as possible. So we want the inner circle to approach the outer edge of the outer circle as close as it possibly can, so that all of the transactions are as direct as possible. So, if you want to look at a quantifiable difference between the guild and the system, then it would be into which way is the outer circle is going. Is it thinning itself out, or is it crushing the center into a lesser and lesser and lesser into a dot? So the system will crush the center into the dot in this analogy, whereas the guild will expand the inner circle as far as it can onto the outer circle. And that interplay is your coherence. If you were to diagram it, that's how you would do that.
Damn.
Is it all making sense? How the dream crushes moment overtakes dream, in not opposing ways, but how the same system is played. Your feedback is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just me talking out of my ass, right?
No, presumably not.
Well, I alluded to it a little bit, but I'll admit to it.
Did I fix it? No, I didn't fix it.
Okay, well, forget about the diagrams. Let's just expand this topic.
It's been mangled. Sorry, that's the best I could do. It's got like a cool brim to it. We'll just pretend that doesn't exist, right? So here's the nude diagram.
Yeah. It's the size difference is really just supposed to reflect the influence of one over the other. In this sort of picture, what we're noticing is that it's the moment that is the main driver, right? If you have the opposing picture in which the inner cylinder is squished into a dot,
Right.
you have the dream as the main driver. And that comes back to my analogy with cart and horse. The dream being the cart, the horse being the moment. And we have the situation in which if you have the cart in front of the horse, the cart is driven by wherever the road takes it, and the horse has no option but to overrun whatever the cart has already demolished in front of it.
Right.
Whereas in the opposite situation, the horse can make the decision of swaying off the road, walking around the obstacle, and continuing on without crushing whatever there was between the two of them. So there's like this delay between situation and decision making, and I've made this point before in different
Horse
ways.
could also get spooked.
Appropriately
And inappropriately
and inappropriately, both.
by, say, a mouse. And then boom, it's gone.
A mouse wouldn't do that to a horse.
I don't know. That's for elephants, I guess.
No, sure. You're from the systemic point of view, aka
It's an argument for system.
If you are the person that needs to get the cart somewhere specifically, and you're using the horse to drive it, then sure, it
Yeah.
might be in your best interest for the horse to not get spooked by whatever the hell it encounters at any given point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too.
Let's say you start walking over a bridge. The horse doesn't even know it yet.
Well,
It
it's
just has to keep looking down or whatever, and there's just one plank after another. And
Oh, you're
everything's
talking
fine.
about the cart in front of the horse.
Yeah.
I'm talking about being spooked by having the
From
horse
being
in
in front. Right.
So the difference is that if the horse is spooked enough by real world situations, it might actually make the correct decisions based on the context that it's in. It very least has that fucking option. And the other scenario it does not.
Mm-hmm.
For one, it can just be told to run, stand, or whatever, but it can't tell where to go or how to run
Right.
fast.
So in other words, that it can be dangerous to give the horse control, if you will.
Because you can't predict that you'll end up in the same place that you wanted to be in, because it might segue off due to obstacles. Sure, you're taking that risk. At the same time, you're taking the risk of the whole thing failing because you're running off of a fucking cliff.
Right.
The horse can't see,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which it could prevent if it could see.
Right. Which would kind of normally make sense, but in some cases not.
Well, it's a very rough analogy, so please do
Right.
not take it too seriously. It's meant
It
to
just
paint
raises
a
other
picture.
contextual questions.
Right.
Like education is important and all that.
The questions are, well, yeah, and education in what sense? The quote-unquote education, which is cart before the horse, or education, which is
Sometimes-
you in front of the cart, taking in the tested and true method of selective natural selection. That's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that, for example, children don't need to be taught. That's not the point that we're trying to make.
Well, it's actually dangerous for a horse to react to everything, which is why you put blinders on so they can only see straight forward where they're going. Right?
The only reason that became a necessity is because what it had to react to was completely not natural
to its normal environment. Right.
If you utilize the environment that the horse actually uses, none of that becomes necessary. And what are the things that made it impossible within the environment for the horse to make its own decision? The environment became fucking unnatural for the horse.
Right.
AKA the human environment is not natural for the horse.
So we have
Do you
the
think
same-
do you think a war horse is in its natural fucking disposition?
We have the same problem. Humans have a vastly different environment now.
Then it's an
what
own
they
natural
do.
one, yeah. Which is, yeah, it is the same problem, except it's worse for the horse because the horse doesn't have the cognitive capacity to do anything about it. We do, and we do, but we make it further and further into the impossible situation.
Mm-hmm. Les impossibles. I think we've clearly laid this beautiful chart out.
It's something. I, of course, imagine this cylinder as a tall tornado. So, if we were to graphically represent it, we would stretch it out, we would make the top more like a funnel. I'm not asking for that now, and I really don't want you to do it.
Don't give me ideas.
Don't. No. I want to use the visuals that we have and use the power of our imagination. Can we do that?
No. That would be
No, I think we have to.
impossible.
You can't do that right now because you're also going to have to give it a twister effect.
Oh, I wasn't trying. I can't model with this thing
So,
like that.
this arrow, regret, anxiety, and back again. Regret, anxiety, and back again. This is supposed to look like an actual twister going up. And the twister itself behaves as like this turbulent, it moves all over the place. What's the word for it? So like, it does its damage, backs up, does its damage, backs up, does it, like you can't predict where it goes
Yeah,
and how it goes
emergent.
around.
Emergent.
And very destructive. And
Right.
the other analogy that this is about is that this is the release of excess energy that gets built up through the buildup of narratives into a mythology that presents a shit show. So everybody adopts the hate, the dislike for the other. That's the energy that gets released in that tornado. So there's like this buildup of energy, and then the unleashing of the actual
Right.
twister. And then once that is
And this
expanded
is
the energy, it gets built up again, and another storm
By
comes.
built up, we're talking like ontological capacity and resonance.
Right, we're talking about like you're an antenna, you are soaking up signals, those signals stir up your internal processes.
Like the energy is building in the matrix, you could say, just by the vast sharing of certain ideology or whatever it is.
Do you remember absorption and dissipation? So we're talking about a stack, a grammatical capacity stack. And part of
Right.
that's functioning is not mere response to energy or signals that it receives specifically, but sort of like absorb signals up until an inner expression gets built up, and only that finally resonates. And depending on what the stack is, it could be, for the same set of signals, it could be very different responses.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it. So the built-up of energy is like the absorption of signals, the absorption of expressions.
It has to wait until
then
that upper layer emerges out of all the pieces. They just kind of chaotically accumulate like a static charge, and then zap. Like
Yeah,
something
an experiential
something above emerges for
an
a moment.
experiential thing is would be like when you're somebody pumps you up to be excited about something. So
Pep talk?
Yeah, they pep talk you. You absorb, and eventually you're so into whatever that language is that like, I'm gonna do this, that, the other thing, and that's the dissipation of the energy. So there's a absorption part and dissipation
Right.
part. So everything you're told gets eventually something to be an expression of what you're saying, and and that's the unquantifiable part. You can't predict. Based on
Sure,
what's
yeah.
being said, what's going to be said. You can only observe the energy being absorbed into the stack and then losing its logical connection and then being dissipated back into the logical connections. And you can't make the logical leap as to why this caused that. So it's like a black hole situation, if you will.
Right. It's the decision is like intuitive.
But only from the perspective of that stack.
That's executing it.
You can't calculate what will be intuitive to some stack.
No.
So much like in physics, quality isn't necessarily the absence of quantity. It's that there is no logical connection that can be asserted between the two. So much like you can't make the logical connection between velocity and position, right? The more you know of one, the less you know of the other. The more you have a quality, the less you know of quantity. The more you have a quantity, the less you have a quality. And that's more metaphorical than it is qualitative. But this is the same metaphor that is leading us into. So the resonance wave, the more you feed it into a specifics, the less you can tell what the outcome will be, because you are charging it up with too many points of information. So the combination of that information is actually unknown to the external force outside of some particular patterns, but which one it's going to take
Right.
is a shit show's game, just like in quantum fields.
Yeah, it's kind of like adding too much energy to it. It's going to go any number of ways because you've added so many fields, relationships to it. In its capacity, you've increased its capacity to do.
It also leads to the notion of why education is seen as a threat to authority, because that education opens up a variability in the outcome that authority does not want to tolerate. Conserved by, right? Which is
Sorry, who doesn't want to tolerate what?
variability. Authoritarianism doesn't tolerate variability well.
That's the point of, well, conservatism itself,
That's what I'm trying
not
to say.
authoritarianism.
Well, sorry, I misspoke. I will.
Something
It's
that's
all
worked.
it's all connected to the same thought process, if you will.
It's like something. It's a thought that allows you to believe something 100% in its correctness, in its certainty. The fact that we exist here because of what we've done in the past. As much as we can truly know the history based on what our parents tell us, so that kind of shit, right?
So imagine a group of those people trying to feed an external stack with that energy, and then punishing any unforeseen reactions.
Right.
So it sort of like diminishes the stack.
Nothing is ever allowed to be done different.
So
You
it
have
will-
to
it will
do
be-
exactly as your father did before, or your mother before.
So it has an effect of one of both ways. The stack either diminishes in its capacity, or refusing to do that, it rebels, so to speak. Right, and the outcome of the stack is not what was being expected or prescribed by
Yeah.
the pressures that went into the,
Right.
say, its
So
stack.
it's like, if you do get your idealistic conservatism dream of pure replication, you end up introducing chaos by simply not changing.
with the
So
environment changing.
By trying to conserve so hard, you've killed it. You've killed yourself.
Indeed, suicide. Not the
Which is ironic because of the intention of the conservatism, right?
even more ironic is that the suicide is written into the notion of conservatism if it were to be carried out the way it's being written. Conservatism at all costs, so to speak.
That's what the ism
Is the death sentence.
denotes. I wanted to distinguish that as well. We talk about conservative, progressive. These would be different again from what we could call conservatism or progressivism, right?
Which are
the
currently-
classic ism.
Which the isms currently are all under the right umbrella. Unfortunately.
That's you could
In the entire
say-
capitalistic world, at least. Where capitalism is presented, you have the elites.
It's neat that we've kind of laid out these terms and like tried to distinguish, like have buckets for talking about different things, all kind of related. But to me, it's been really important that the reason for politics, like conserving something or progressing to something better, those are like anybody can understand that. Like it's perfectly natural and seems like unarguable.
Right. But then we have the caricatures.
Then there's all the
of
ways that it gets messed up, right?
And so we get caricatures. So we get the left and right caricatures of what we're talking about, of conservatives.
Tism.
No, not ism, the being conservative and being...
We're saying right wing and left wing as the current ideologue, partisan.
So part of the discussion today was about how left and right has retained the labels, but the entire congregation of it moved to the right of what left and right was meant in the first place. So we have...
Yeah, interesting.
So our left
Which
side
is why some people would
politics
say the
are-
left seems authoritarian.
Yeah, so our left side politics are basically very much centrist right wing politics. So politics that are right wing still to the expression, but they are left of the other right wing politics.
Hmm. And you're having like these mass imagery of like what's
Is
mass
ideal.
moralism,
Yes.
sort of, right?
That's
Which-
the dead giveaway.
Wild. Holy
That's
fuck.
the dead giveaway. As to like that society
When you
prescribes.
see mass moralism, even on the left, you can understand how that's authoritarian and actually right.
And to be clear, it's not about pronouns or any of that stuff that a lot of people seem to think that it's
And
about.
neither left or right's ideal. Again, when we're talking ideal model stuff, we've been using now conservative and progressive.
Yeah.
as a generic markers for now. till we
Left
get
and
better.
right would be the caricatures of progressive and
Right.
and authoritarian,
Conservative.
conservative. And by caricatures, I mean they speak homage to the label, but do not actually exercise the activity of the ideal that they are
As it's been defined
referencing.
in the past. Of course, we can redefine everything however we want.
Right, but they moved all the
Right?
meaning.
And this is the value of studying history, I
So
guess.
the meaning behind left and right becomes obfuscated, is what the point is. And
Like, people grow up in new cultures where words mean very different things now. So when you try to read history, even the words have to be translated. Like,
Well-
what did they mean by this in that history? Like, you know what I mean?
For example, the word woke came into prominence in the last decade
Used as a label.
for being basically concerned with humanity, but besides that, the people that keep using it have zero comprehension of that it's been
think
hijacked.
Every movement just gets hijacked like that, though. That's
No,
it.
but woke has an actual meaning before it's been used this way.
Every
and
movement
that
seems
meaning-
to have a meaning from a real experience or
And
something.
so that meaning has
real
been
history.
has been kicked to the curb by
Yeah.
this new current usage. It used to
maybe
mean
it just wasn't used enough. Nobody used it anymore.
No,
so they,
it was used by a
appropriated-
minority. It was used by a minority. It was used by essentially black people to tell each other to be vigilant when they go outside anywhere, to know, like, just to be aware of the fact that they could be targeted
there's
by law enforcement.
Dynamics, social dynamics.
Yeah. So it came from that. Then George
Even
Floyd.
like the feeling of walking, I guess, past people on the street, by being black, you may perceive.
if you look at
or
somebody the wrong
see
way,
as-
you might be trying to rob them.
they
or
may
something.
feel threatened or something,
Yeah.
and like just by that preconception.
So,
right?
so up until basically last decade, this was basically its usage, and then it's been hijacked from the George Floyd protests, because that's when it became much more prominent in the media. And so, what did the right opposition do is they hijacked the very same word to tell people that they need to be more aware, alert, and whatnot in the more concrete sense, into this ideological position of anybody and anyone who says anything negative against authority
It's
towards
left.
toward-
It's just associated with left.
exactly.
That's
So
all. That word became left.
black people have
As
been
generic as we've been discussing left.
So
here.
black people have been robbed of its usage based on George Floyd's protests, and now it's being weaponized again to reinforce that it can never be utilized in any other sense, by creating this weird ass mythology that it's anything to do with humanitarian actual disposition, regardless of how disconnected it might be from each other, which is what I described the left as to be in the first place. So I'm
You
not
think
saying anything
that
different.
George Floyd protest time was when the word woke got turned around.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's been hijacked.
Feels
by
like
the,
it was before then, but I guess like
So,
so many new trends come up and
Black
people,
Lives Matters.
It's like these political parties and the left and right is just like a media stream which controls a massive amount of people to suddenly be concerned about this, and now let's be concerned
So-
about this, and it's like one after another for both left and right.
Yes.
They're targeted by what they should be woke about.
So check
or
this
whatever,
out. Black Lives
right?
Matter started because of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter created the medium necessary for the word woke to become resonant across multiple places. Multiple places got wind of that. Oh,
Fight back.
right, because
The
they're
cultural
because they're seeing the Black
interference.
Lives Matter as like, oh no, all lives matter. Those kinds of people I'm talking about. Those are that response.
Because
They're
many
taking
many
that
people
word
can
woke,
fall into that.
and then now they're saying like, everybody who talks about like Black Lives Matter but not all lives matter, or like they're like these woke people, and that's how the ball got rolling. And eventually it
you
became
think that's-
anything to do
that's-
with protest with
It's like a whataboutism, but don't you think that's how people who would describe the model may be seen as? Like, because we could point at any situation. Oh, what about the axiological conspiracy? What about that?
not
That-
following. The right has a propensity to actually actualize a mythology, whereas the left has a disconnected set of mythologies. So one side does not act like the other, but both sides will present each other as itself. So the right presents the left as following ideologues, because the right follows ideologues, and that's how it sees anybody else functioning. The left does not follow ideologues, but stuck to whatever ideologies that they have, and they are stuck thinking. The right does not have a concrete mythology.
It's like an icon, but it's not a living person often. It's
Right.
a book or an author.
Right. And so they attribute the exact same mentality to the others. And so these guys don't react to any information but to people. These guys don't react to people, react to information, but blame each other to reacting. The right blames the left for reacting to people, and the left blames the other for reacting for information from people. Neither side is able to
Interesting.
appreciate the fact that they don't think the same.
Hadn't thought about that, but that's probably should remember process.
Well, this is the kind of nuance that goes on in my head.
Well, I think it's important to define and talk about the context, because we, even in talking in politics, we have to lay our own kind of framework or mesh of terms and all this, right?
Yeah.
Even to be
It's
able to
even
talk.
it's even made more difficult by the fact that nobody is strictly extremely right or extremely left, unless you're talking about a very, very edge case individual. And no, so to put it all together, people will act right in some contexts and left in others, identify with one, shit on the other, and this basically, like, the entire shit show is like it's shitting on itself over and over and over again, and nothing gets done. And systemically, this is the desired position, because all of that means is that the status quo simply continues on. And this is exactly what the system is comfortable with. Revolt, reform, revolution, war, all of that feeds the same premise. The system keeps the status quo.
So almost you could say, like, we could kind of swap the word war in the ego chart with the word shit, sort of. It's kind of a comical way.
You can do it for reform, revolution, and war. All of them are.
Right. It's all shit, okay.
They're all different kinds of turds.
Something like, yeah. There's a
Some of them may contain more fiber. Others may contain more protein. Some of them might be diarrhea.
Right. Some of them it's
Which
just,
one would you prefer to pick up?
Some of them it's just a fart.
Which one do you prefer to actually go reach down and pick up and touch? Which one compels you, Brian? Which one? Tell us. Either way, you're picking up shit.
Right. And worst of all, it's being flung at you at high speed, so it's not really actually a choice.
Right in the eye area.
Yep. And any wounds you may have encountered from
Specifically raccoons.
various
Raccoons from various
animals. Raccoons. And with that, we shall be right back.
same signals, which is like our medium, right? It's feeding the same signals into a grammatical capacity stack is what I'm referring to as energy. So like when you have photons hitting particles, signals is the medium by which energy is exchanged in this model. But because it's a grammatical capacity, we don't have same similar particles like we would have in physics. We have very similar kinds of particles, but because they're so multi-layered and self-interactive, the output and input share a very, very, very great discrepancy that cannot be accounted for logically. That isn't very specific to context. Like you can't even apply the same logic to every situation. You have to change the logic behind the way it came about for every situation. So there's no all-encompassing system to say and predict how this is all going to happen. So when we're talking about energy, we're not talking about energy in the form of photons, but we're talking about signals being absorbed and signals being expressed, and the differentiating sort of effects that it has on something quantifiable outside of that.
Yeah.
So how do our conversation
And
like
signals
this
like
affect us
connection, like accumulating of different regions in your brain of different ideas all come together. Suddenly you realize that you can do something now, and that emerges.
but also being fed enough and you know, like wanting to, and you know, like all these
That
other
all has
factors
to be there, yeah. That's
all
what I
these other
mean.
factors that don't even, like, you can't even
Those are part
calculate
of it.
those.
Yeah, it's like assuming you're out of that struggle of just trying to somehow not think about
Mhm.
the fact that you can't pay a bill.
Right, like
Meanwhile, you're working
and
as hard as you can. You
the
can't
difference
work
between the
harder.
person that can pay a bill and can't pay a bill too. The actions that they take. There's so many different like variances to this, to what energy looks like from a stack perspective than it is for a particle. That we're not talking about the same thing, but mythology-wise, it's a similar concept. Right, an isomorphic concept, if you will, a mapping of a concept. So they did a feeding of signals into expressions and expressions into actions, which become expressions themselves, and that cycle continues.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like you're just sitting there waiting for conditions to be met.
Is it done?
It would. Yeah.
It's even as simple as like being given a command in English and not speaking it, versus being given a command in English and speaking it somewhat, versus being given a command in English and speaking it perfectly.
Right.
Similar stacks, similar energy input, but the output is going to be different based on the stack's composition. And all of that is, again, you can't initially calculate that because the elements that you're using as similar and the elements that you're getting are not similar. So you're using people as your medium, so you're substituting one person for another. That's similar, but each person is different. That's different. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like you can't have the same self-similarity as you do with particles. I mean, which should be obvious. It's not like I'm revealing something like that's extraordinary here. This is literally just observing the obvious and
maybe
you're
it's
speaking to it.
Maybe it's just a happy coincidence, but it's kind of feels anecdotal. But the model is isomorphic with experience. So if the model's taken up in faith and belief or whatever, one can observe that it is able to predict or describe
Well, this
the
is
experience that follows after experimentations using the model. You
Yes.
experiment, you try something crazy, while it explained what just happened like it said it would, keep going.
and also why the model has something like temperaments. It's not like you're going to view the model the same way from your perspective that I do and any of that stuff. It's more like, okay, from my perspective, this is what your perspective looks like. From your perspective, this is what my perspective looks like. If we sit together and bash our heads together and be like,
Mhm.
okay, does it all map?
Temperament is
Does
deep.
what maps? And if it maps, then why the fuck not? Even though what maps might not be the same thing. So, for example, the whole guild scenario versus
I like the
whole,
basis for that though too, like the Buddhist schools, like the order and all that.
how
The Mahayana,
ours developed incidentally,
like starting
very
with the
closely
academic,
to it.
the Pali Canon.
Yeah. So, nuance there. Theravada in and of itself is not a new school, but the material that it decided to restrict itself to comes from what would be considered the older
So even
and
after the
oldest
fact,
schools.
it's as
They're
a
fairly-
body recategorize itself into this sort of understanding, I guess.
So modern Theravada is literally a response to Christianity and an attempt to present them Buddhism not just as something that like believes in all these weird gods and goddesses that are depicted in the imagery,
Right.
but like here's what the practice actually will look like. And
Yeah.
Thailand monks and a few
And
of those.
there's a
they were-
phenomenological connection that I that must be a focus to be made understood. The phenomenological,
Yeah. So
right, between what Buddhists practice and their model and what one can experience. Like they must press that.
old Buddhism is kind of selfish in the sense that, and this is also tied to the environment that they lived in the sense that you're not concerned with the woes of the world. You are to take the what you are seeing as is, so to speak, and develop yourself into something that understands all of that from your perspective. So it's kind of like a very personal journey, and oftentimes seen as selfish, right? But in this case, it's basically take the inside, work on it, and integrate everything from the outside into it. Whereas the other side of the school is
If you go far enough
is the
one
other
way,
around.
you'll find the opposite anyways.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter which
Right.
way
And
you
so,
take.
based on this premise, the other schools in the Buddhist history got developed, and that was if you take everything from the outside in, you will become reflective of it. So it had
Right.
it's a parallel image,
Which is
but a
very
different-
helpful for the devotional temperament of like, let's
Right.
discuss what's the ideal.
Right.
Who
right.
is the ideal being?
And that becomes the cosmic Buddha. So there's a personal Buddha that you are becoming versus
The cosmic
the Buddhas
Christ.
that become the overseers of the cosmic order, if you will, in that same sort of flip-flop understanding. And this is all mythological from the perspective that it's not meant to like dictate whether you're going to stub your toe or not in the scientific sense about what molecules happen to shift where. It's more about like whether the experience matches the story that you are repeating in your head. And from both
Right.
perspectives, the story can be repeated.
Yeah. So
and
for
not be
most people,
contradictory to itself, but not
with a devotional temperament would be wanting to or able to understand this sort of presentation much more, like the Mahayana, the Zen. What was the other one? The free Pure Land.
yeah pure.
So like Pure Land as in the example of the devotional on the Buddhist side.
Yeah, so Mahayana sort of becomes a meta medium, out of which you have your Chan, Zen.
And these are sort of like talking about
Pragmatics.
ideals, even both of them, I think.
Yeah, and you often find within Mahayana there's a huge relationship between all schools of Mahayana. So even though each one will focus on an individual aspect, it's like they use bits and pieces of all the other ones to piece it all together. With the underlying
Right.
initial Buddhist stuff to fund the underpinnings of everything, being the most basic, the academic medium for everything else to follow. And so at the top, you kind of reflect back on the academic medium, but also taking into account of
Right.
all that they created.
So this is our, like you could say, like at least Portal Mountain model of Buddhist
progression, yeah.
progression. That's our holonic interpretation of the Buddhist schools.
Yeah, well, we're giving homage to specific ones,
Well,
but they're more generic. They're more generic than
And
the Buddhist.
Vajrayana mirroring the Theravada on the outside as beyond horizon.
Yeah, so take the academics, run them through the simulator, and now present a picture of everything
And
that's
this
in
is
the simulation.
This is a perceptive temperament
Yes.
instead of
So-
academic with the Theravada.
So now present everything in that simulation unbiasedly with the academic portrayal of how they interact together. So it's like
Just
taking
like
all
a
of these layers
mechanism,
and
like
just,
a gear,
squishing it
gear
up.
mechanism, and being able to interpret or see things living before you with that sort of understanding of what's going on. The
So-
mechanics.
So in this case, Theravada is like, I'm going to give you the building blocks of all the simulation, and you run the simulation yourself, see what you see. Tough to do. The other
Right.
ones present you with the concrete simulation in two different fashions. Cosmic, the cosmos, or the person moving through said cosmos. So cosmos and its characters, or I'm a character in the cosmos. That's where they're kind of intertwined. And the third one goes, we gave you the pieces.
It's concrete and abstract.
Yes. We gave you the pieces, we gave you the simulation. What does that smushed layer looks like? So simulation plus pieces of simulation. So you're not just focused on DNA. You got cells and DNA and viruses and this and that. So and thoughts and. So
And
all
the-
of it together.
And the entire stack is made of developing, progressing, and conserving.
So not only do you have molecules in the stack, you also have people, personalities, trajectories, stories, so on and so forth. Things that are way out of the capacity for molecules to dictate. That's where
Right.
Theravada and Vajrayana differ. And like Theravada is like trying to talk to you about the molecules. Vajrayana is like the molecules do this. This is the simulation. Together, we're like talking about the stories, the molecules, and.
It seems like that I'm reminded of the necessity often posited for, like I guess you'd say either a master, grandmaster to be present as like the guide, a physical guide relationship, which this is just a
Reflective
reflection of how that school
reflective of.
operates.
They all operate in that way because that necessity doesn't actually dissipate with development of Buddhism. It's just that it becomes more overt rather than covert. So you still see the master-student relationship in Theravada. You still see it in Zen. You see it to some degree in Pure Land, in that you have more like a preacher slash
Sure, yeah.
pastor sort of figure.
So you're saying it's already a normal fixture.
right.
To at least have somebody either pastoring at the very least.
It's just at the very end of that trajectory where you have like, this is exactly why you have master-student relationship. It just like drives the point, the mythology of it home, by taking every aspect of the previous mythologies together.
And isn't this interesting how this temperament like that teaches grand mastery, because you're able to look at the student, understand their temperament, understand your own temperamental biases, but then take a narrative that the student is in and become an object in that narrative, totally shaping like the lessons learned or like what progresses or next, and just speaking that
Resonating.
into the relationship, like that ability to do that.
Coherently resonating maybe would be the best way to describe that, because everything else could be like charlatanism essentially, right? And
been a
by
while.
saying it this way, at least we're trying to say coherent with the model, and the resonance has to have that kind of limit to it. for mastery at least. Like if you, that's where mastery becomes mastery rather than charlatanism, because every speech is charlatanistic in nature. You're selling something, you're commodifying something, you're systemizing something.
Right.
Right.
Which isn't necessarily bad. We create systems. There always is the ontological
Yeah.
matrix.
And that's what, and
whether
what
it's
makes it,
to what
quote,
end,
unquote,
this or that.
and what makes it quote unquote not bad is its ability to be coherent, resonate coherence. The messages that are sent out are coherent. It's the same discrepancy that you find in the teaching of works and faith. Faith is expressed by works, right? Like, because the presence of faith is evident by the activity of the faithful, if you will. Otherwise, what is the point of either word? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if how
Right.
what is it like to be faithful to? To simply speak. Well, that's work in and of itself. Cool.
Right. And it's easy to get into that, like, oh, I'll just appear to be doing the thing that I need to do. Meanwhile, your heart isn't in it. You're not really engaging with the, what it could be.
Even not even that, because even that could be like, if you're still engaging properly, you're still having some form of faith of like, this is at least going to get you through something. A complete lack of faith is going against that and having everything reflected otherwise. Like, why should I do X? It's not going to grant anything that I would like from X. There's a discrepancy between what is given and what is wanted, if you will. So, yeah. Lack of faith is evident through lack of work, is what I'm saying. Like, and this is how that shows.
Right. I feel like what you're pointing at is, like, with that
It's just a good
say,
scripture.
mastery, grand mastery relationship, this is an open field for the picking of, like, which behavior to pick apart and say, like, look how you're doing this or that. Like, as being present in somebody's life, to have a relationship where you would talk about how things get done or watch each other, like, you know what I mean? To be able to speak into somebody's life, like, I see you doing this or whatever. Yeah, that's trust has to be built, right, for that kind of thing.
The subject of discussion of the previous meeting. And trust is like a fundamental to faith. So the faith that
Right.
we're talking about isn't like your, I've been told a story. I have no way of telling if the story is true or not, but I choose to believe the people that told me the story.
What's that accent?
Because that's how they always sound.
Are you anti-Southern?
No, I'm just biased and have my own follies.
Too much media.
Too much medium. It's not a strict. It's not a strict commentary on anybody. It's just the way that kind of rhetoric sounds in my head. It's a lot of assertions. Very, very, very sure of themselves and nonsense. Like, the reason is like just not there at all. Now, that's a very biased experience, so. I do find that it's interesting that they tend to all have accents because they're all from isolated communities.
I got distracted dreaming about Grand Mastery. And I accept your apology. On
Yeah.
behalf of the Southern,
On
on behalf of the South, I accept your
that
apology.
you so easily represent
Yep.
with your Russianism.
I do hereby declare
That's
acceptance of your apology.
that is how we hear them.
Let it be done.
There are some people from the South I actually have great respect for. Dolly Parton is one of them.
Oh, another left idol worship?
No, I don't know if she's personally.
Just teasing, because that's the point. Like, there's.
I know that
seems
she's
impossible to have.
I know that she's sort of revered in left circles, but her demeanor isn't left or right. Her personal demeanor doesn't seem to be left or right. It seems to be just grounded.
Well, she did demand that everybody get vaccinated or something. So that's a lot of people are going to view that as, well, this is a soundbite, therefore she's left. There's no telling.
Yeah,
you can't tell me
like,
she's right anymore. She's
it's like
left.
calling me left.
Left is the enemy.
It's like calling me left, because I would have the same sentiment, and I did and do have the same sentiment, that it's the sort of like the way forward. But I hope you've noticed that I don't actually have any specific love for anything to do with the left, and I tend to say that
Except
the
for
left.
Dolly Parton.
No, I just I just like her, not because of the left, but because of who she is. Like, I like what she's about.
Did you watch her concerts or something? Or
No,
interviews?
I've seen a few of her interviews. Yeah,
with who?
decent person.
Who
Fuck, I
interviewed?
forget. I forget, because interviewers are not the star of the show. I don't
Colbert?
I don't know if I've seen her with Colbert. Can't remember if I did. She basically says very, very straightforward things, like
Letterman?
probably fuck if I
That
know.
would be a classic.
She says straightforward things. It's like there is no.
I don't think I've
There's
ever
no-
listened to her much. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't really
all
know.
she says is that a human is a human. Like, you don't treat them based on based on
Isn't
weird
this kind of
discrepancies.
interesting?
That's all the mess.
Look,
That's the
look
entire
at
message.
look at both parties right now. If you could say that the right is often like more religious or Christian in values and
The-
all this
the
kind of
ro-
stuff,
the-
projecting of.
The right,
Um,
consists of more people that gravitate towards religion. So
But
there are
imagine
people that,
like,
don't.
both sides end up doing this. It seems.
Okay,
But
there's a difference between what you call religion, because there's traditional religion, but professionalism.
So let's say like
Is
the
another
LGBT and all this as a thing is like to accept and love. Love is love, right? Like as like let's just say that that's like a championed ideal. Love is love
So,
kind of thing.
are we talking about the LGBTQ
but look,
medium?
listen to
the
this.
medium or the people?
The right wing side with their kind of Christian take on this is like
It's off nature.
Jesus loved everybody, so you should love your neighbor. Love, like the first response isn't to hate anybody. I'm not talking about like the a
Execution.
lot of what's been how it's been executed in the church itself.
Okay, you're
But, like,
talking about
as
the
an
ideal, right?
Let's take both sides from their face value that they really believe the ideals. So one is like Jesus, the best dude on the earth,
So love the sinner, hate the sinner.
and like the left side is like, well, let's love everybody.
Love
so
the sinner, hate the sin. Yes.
would be on the right side, something like that.
So I have the right to respect you, but not your opinion. Now, tell me that's not the same statement, and tell me that's not love.
Okay, hold on. I didn't finish my idea.
My bad, my bad, my bad. But
Because
just know where I'm going,
the
where I'm gonna go.
the left side, love everybody, seems to exclude on our type of everybody, which is the ones that have colorful stuff going on. And like those Christians, those are the ones we're not gonna love. And it's like it's both ways.
Yeah.
Right? But we're supposedly like literally love everybody. That's what the major icon here is saying. That's what the ideology itself is saying. On both sides, love everybody except the other one.
I've thought about this statement specifically many, many times, and love
They're
this.
both doing the same thing.
So love the sinner, hate the sin.
In an ideal world.
On the right, or I have to respect you, but not your opinion on the left.
As like
But if you digest both of those statements, you'll find that it's basically the same statement.
right?
One is ideologically contradictory, the other is ideologically incomplete, but they are the same statement.
What are the two? I thought they were the same.
So ideologically contradictory on the right. So you have your ideology built up, complete picture, but contradicts itself. You don't have a complete picture.
Pardon.
You don't contradict yourself, but you don't have a complete picture. So when you don't have a complete picture, it's okay to respect the person, but not their ideology. Reject whatever group they're in. On the other flip
Right.
side is you love the sin or you hate the sin. You also do the exact same thing, basically, and you try to assimilate them into yourself and exterminate whatever the difference is.
Right.
So in both cases, it's the same thing.
It sets up a structure of
The language is
opposition
different.
that there's an outside and an inside.
Right. The language is different. The outcome in the myth is
Right.
actually very much the same.
So that's
in
how,
its
like,
statement.
in the highest levels of understanding, it can be such a pure ideological acceptable thing, but in practice, it ends up just being captured by one side or another of a political
So the same meta,
leverage point.
it's the same meta narrative expressed differently in different hyper narratives, if you will. So when it trickles down to an actual specific narrative to oneself, it becomes either love the sin or hate the sin on the one side from the hyper narrative, because it's a hyper narrative because everybody says love the sin or hate the sin. It's not your personal thought. It's the same thought everybody else shares
Okay.
in this hyper narrative. Same, likewise, it's in this other hyper narrative. Respect the person, don't respect their beliefs. You identify you plug your narrative into this hyper narrative.
It's how you
of
naturally
what is supposed to be respected.
approach the reality of what's going on based on how you process it in an abstract or more concrete way.
So
That's how you start your thought.
So in the meta narrative, you have two hyper narratives that are exactly the same thing being told to you. That are diametric opposites to each other. Obfuscated.
So, like, I feel like this has to be the ultimate result of the axiological conspiracy.
Duh.
Like, this is
Sorry, but
at the highest level ideological capture,
Is to- is-
divide into the system by itself for its own purposes. It's a breakaway civilization.
So the 33 myths of the system are describing these kinds of obfuscations. So
Darren
this
Allen.
is So this is one of those kinds of obfuscation that I don't think he directly talked about, but he mentioned in various ways from his approaches. So this is how, like, you have one meta narrative divided out into different hyper narratives that totally obfuscate one from each other, and presented in totality.
And I think what's critical for that is a separation of media.
I kind of worded it
media
wrong.
channels. Because the media has to be separate because you have totally different stories being told to left and to right.
So
they're on different channels. They're hooked up to different
That's
things.
that's the hyper
websites.
part. That's the hyper part.
Right? They're
Because-
getting their hyper narrative doses
So the
that are
news.
tailored to one side or the other.
So the news is the narrative each individual person plugs into to justify their personal narrative as being part of the hyper narrative that's being combined together for them by the media, by the news. And now when you have the divide, they might be saying the same thing in different words, providing the obfuscation layer.
Right.
But the meta narrative turns
And-
out is that every single one of the bottom group is poised against the other group
Each
exactly
other.
the same way.
totally opposed.
So that's the meta narrative.
when it begins with
And it's obfuscated because nobody knows this. That's what's obfuscated.
right. In the end, that's the final calculation: is that hey, we're opposed.
Yeah, but you're opposed for the same reasons for
But
the
it
same
begins
things.
from the same meta narrative, but just a different shard of it, kind of.
Yeah, different
So that's
language.
why both sides can feel like having access to truth, because
Which
the,
in a
the
sense
whole
it is.
the whole myth complex is complete in that sense.
But then it gets laundered through the meta narrative in the sense that this side is opposed to that side. it's all transactional. Whereas there's two meta narratives, right? There's the meta narratives that says, hey, these are hyper narratives are actually opposites, and there's the other narrative that says they're
Right,
actually
model.
opposites.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite one is the one that's obfuscating things. And if
Model.
it's the one that takes place, then everybody's against each other.
There's model and obfuscation.
Oh, model.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's it basically.
The axiological conspiracy.
Yeah, which from previous episodes works primarily on rewarding punishment
It started with counting.
to drive itself, to drive the dream, to drive the
with
tether.
the open fields of the ice age receding.
Mm.
Grain, distillery, alcohol,
Yeah, so lots of people tend to
party
still
time,
think.
feast economy. That's our like birth origin story, if you will, of like civilization, you could say.
Let's run through it again because it's actually fascinating.
Yeah.
So the premise is, at least the modern premise for
You have tribes and probably lots of war and conflict or whatever, but nothing really created this tornado effect where you have something self-sustaining and
so what's in. Sorry, I'm not trying to like.
the birth of civilization.
I'm not trying to take away from what you're
It's fine,
saying.
man. The walled city.
But the interesting thing to me is that we have this one narrative that says we're progressing from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age
Technological.
to the Iron Age and all of that stuff.
It's just like, oh, we invented this. Oh, we invented this type
And-
of sword. Now we invent this type of sword. Okay, that's how you're dividing up.
Before that though.
I get
And
it
then-
as
then-
for
then there's-
geological reasons.
So archaeologically speaking, there's a discrepancy between that feel-good story and what we're finding. And the primary interesting thing is that one of the assumptions is that throughout the lands, each individual community eventually discovered the technologies necessary to start developing civilization.
Metallurgy.
And then like you'll have these pockets of civilization popping up across the world around the same time, and
Right.
civilization takes off as a linear, so to speak,
Yeah.
progression from the primitive.
When we think of history, we think
societies.
of like clean evolution of one state. Now you're the next. Now you're the next. But meanwhile, like you had, maybe there was in the beginning, like it could have been in any number of
So-
civilization pockets that ended up becoming like dominant.
So-
right, whereas others would have just fallen or
So
crumbled
here's-
for whatever reason.
So here's a reason. What they're seeing archaeologically is that in any given area, the tendency is not for whatever local population is there to grow into an archaeological superpower, but rather very few pockets of archaeology have developed that began to sweep across different lands and
Right.
overtaking them by force. And so what you're seeing is actually the
That's-
extinction of diversity of populations within places being replaced by a monoculture of whatever superpower that initially started the thing. So we're not looking at a gradual, peaceful sort of transition.
No.
We're talking about
You
a
have to look
violent
the
one
first
of
thing,
displacement.
yeah, like the first type of wave of terror, if you will. Like, let's call it what it is. If one thing is suddenly, like I was saying, pockets of civilization coming up, who knows which is going to last. As soon as one really mechanizes its growth ability, like
Industrializes, basically. if you will.
industrializes even its
And
management.
primitive industrialization.
Right.
Let's put it this way.
But even to have like government buildings and stuff, and like plenty of elders and people inside people, whatever, gang lords,
They're all
getting
about
together,
expansion.
right? Just to see like let's
And-
do the best.
And this is what archaeology is actually showing us: is that individual different tribes get swapped out of the
Right.
face of the planet, being displaced by this agricultural
Pardon.
culture.
It's easy to kind of get down on that, but of course,
And then we have the other premise about where the agriculture
it's always just been people getting swept up into like a tornado sort of happening.
right. And the other thing that we stand against
There's
from the
no-
normal
no blame.
narrative, which archaeology seems to also support, is the fact that crops were not developed initially for food.
Alcohol.
Drugs.
Feast
in,
economy.
in general, drugs, which led to the feast economy. So the premise of, there being is that the initial nomadic tribes weren't actually restricted to agricultural lands. Even once they had developed, they used them primarily because they were great sources of mass drug production. So once upon a time, drugs were produced a long time ago. So these fields made it so that drug production became much more lucrative and easier to do, which
I'd
in
be
turn
interested in the actual
transformed into
spread,
the
the spread of
feast economy.
types of drugs. Alcohol, even itself, could be very explanatory, and I've heard it used in context of civilization as like symbiotic, especially for like.
You can produce it from anything.
For sterilizing.
You can
water.
produce it from fruit.
When you have the alcohol process, the water becomes drinkable, right?
Yeah. So I'm stating the obvious, but obviously you can produce it from fruit and whatever. The difference is that now you have like this open field of grain or whatever. This this monotone.
Check this out
crop.
too. You've got that. You can distill it, make alcohol. Even just that explains how you can have a society where people feel happy and celebrating all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You get your reward of alcohol
And
by
being invited to a
working the
feast.
fields. Not only from your own tribe, say you could say family is management, the first mafia,
Mm-hmm.
but you want to just pull in immigrants underneath you and create a two-class society.
Your people have worked my fields.
Because it's
come to
my
the feast.
my fields, right?
And the initial premises
Right,
for
and just a
possession,
party, bring
possession
everyone
of
in,
land and all
right?
that
And you
stuff.
get people working your system.
Mm-hmm. Now we're not talking about an immediate transformation. We're talking about imagine 1,000
But
years
this
of
is
this
power, and now imagine you have a rival
and obligations
who's
and
also doing this. They're like
jealousy.
whatever.
So the
How far
control.
away?
So the premise being then is that the control for the fields became the first premise of ownership of land, and so
Right,
forth.
'cause
to,
you can't
to
just
produce that feast
Nobody
economy.
agrees even to just let it falter, go away to the wind. So the whole setup of making alcohol, it's just
Yeah.
Hey, if nobody plants anything this season, who cares really? It's
Now,
fine. It's
now,
fine.
now
Hell
you're,
no.
now you're seeing the very first excuse for people to become not nomadic but settled,
Right.
to keep control of said fields, and from there the story.
From the settlements, that's where
It's
the
from
base
there the story
became the basis
unfolds.
of power. The first base is the walled city.
Right. From there the story unfolds in this case. So we have these two different contradictory orientations. The first one is
And there's a perfect motive for it.
well, we have a few. We have one of them is energy
Everybody
transfer.
loves what's going on so much, they just want to work harder and then drink after.
Well, at first it sounds like a great idea, right? You only do one thing.
Right.
You go home and you get wasted. Like, fuck. Sounds great. That's like what we still keep trying to do.
Pretty sweet.
Like, literally, most of us keep trying to do
Cheers,
exactly
man.
that.
That's definitely
this
a good
is
thing
like
to
the-
cheers to.
And as good old hypocrites, I mean, we're drinking the fruits of that labor.
To the ever as always.
But yeah, like there's archaeological contradictions to the story we're being told. The first one is how we arrived at settling, and the second one is how we arrived at lack of diversity across lands that have been settled. And neither of them are nice stories, and they're not indicative of progression of humanity, but rather its violence and propensity for.
Right. And happenstances of which peoples were closer to which resources or whatever for this to become a thing.
And the situational
Part
opportunity
of-
of the last ice age, that the last ice age produced for us. By the
Ice
time we
age?
were ice age, by the time we were smart
They
enough
also they
to
called
take
it
care
an
of
ass
it.
age.
Well, it might as well be, right? We exterminated the rest of our species, so we're
Survival
on
of the fittest.
we're on a consolidation trajectory, which basically means extinction. And our way of thinking isn't helping matters. Like, you know how I play those weird games where I get to take over the galaxy?
Sure.
Well, the only reason I mention it is because the way they operate is extremely reductionist. You only have like 2 species per planet,
Yeah.
and they're all like within the system or somehow in service of it,
And all you're allowed to do is save democracy.
or
Every
or,
time.
or be democracy.
Save B, same thing.
Like you get the differences in governmental power options, but you don't get to like not tell people what to do.
It
Which,
is
yeah.
getting there as far as the time. Probably got another
15.
10, 15 minutes, potentially.
So, the tether. We were talking about it bottoming out and coming from the top. I forget what the terms were. We didn't write them down either. We were talking about it on the stairs. So, if we were
We
to
didn't
imagine
put it on this one.
yeah, like if we were imagining a typhoon, the moment bottoms out into some psychosis. No, the bottom is psychosis, and the top become the sky. So the ground is psychosis. The sky becomes The ground becomes neurosis.
That's
The sky becomes psychosis.
more concrete, down to earth. The feeling of momentum,
Reactory.
an accumulation of a path through the forest. You just walk it because it's there. The Axiological Conspiracy. Yeah, I think we did cover quite a bit. Nice to have the Dust Man. Yeah, we ain't there yet.
Wait.
Not that I remember what you were. Wait, hold on. What you were talking about? But
No, we were talking about the sky and the ground being neurosis, psychosis. Not in that order.
right. So it's like the tornado chart imagery.
Mm-hmm. Which we call the tether.
Right.
So we're trying to illustrate how it's binding.
Now, this makes me think that there always is a tether, and normally is, and should be, but it's like quality of tether.
Right. And this is what...
Like this, we are the tornado. Like
So-
I'm a tornado.
Right. So this is like your negative entropy analogy, and this is why we have the notion of the dream squeezing the moment into a point, and then the point be making the dream into a thin layer, which may as well be two-dimensional.
Right.
So that's like the differentiator. So yes, it's always a tornado, but are we talking about weak walls and a strong eye, or are we talking about a weak eye and a strong wall?
Right. Right.
Which corresponds to cart before horse
It's
analogy.
when, yeah, like the dream is constricting, so there's nothing left of the moment because it's like the moment is somehow automated in a way that it's not allowed to become
Yeah.
self-referential or self-understanding.
Even if it is, it's not geared towards anything useful in that direction. That element of the narrative is punished. So even like a realization of that fact.
Hmm. Not again. Well, I guess there it is. I don't know why it looks different though, but
It's too shallow.
material. Nothing left of it. It's all dream.
Dreaming for the dream. So like, if you look at the thickness of it, right? And you imagine how it's like a revolution of regret and anxiety. It's like you can tell how there's more regret, more anxiety, except until it's just all regret, all anxiety.
Right?
That's kind of the message behind this picture.
There we go.
So, dysmorphism is a thick outer cylinder. Isomorphism would be a representative of a thin, almost like one-dimensional
Dream.
membrane. Or two-dimensional membrane encompassing. Let's smoke.
Damn.
Right? Make sense? All of that? Was I able to produce something useful?
Well, I think so. Was I able to produce something useful?
You're certainly following instructions. Do you get the discrepancies between?
I'm not at fault for the charts.
No, no.
That's what
But
you're saying.
do you see the cyclone and the ideas that I'm trying to portray with the eye of the storm?
Oh, yeah,
and
we already-
the wall
we-
of the storm.
Understood. Talked about it before.
So, with the moment being the primary driver in front of the cart, if you will, of course, in front of the cart, the membrane of the dream is so thin, it's almost like a puff of wind. The other way around is that the wind is so strong, is that the moment you step one step outside of your designated area, you get swept up by the shitstorm so bad, it rips you apart.
Right.
So we're talking hurricane.
Yeah, that's pretty apt.
Even though tornadoes
metaphor.
are pretty deadly.
Right. Well, hurricane is kind of like similar, same phenomenon.
But the safety net around this hurricane is the moment-based one is such that the wall of wind is just a puff of, you know, like its ability to sweep you away is so little.
Right.
Like all the weight is in the center.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, I guess, a structure that it's ideally Hellenic modeling structure. That's all it is. It lets there's space to be objects or whatever, and that's fine.
Yeah, a very thin membrane. Internal and internal of the cell. Internal and internal of the organism. Those are thin membranes.
Right. Sounds natural.
Isomorphic, perhaps.
It's always good.
Long live the isomorphism.
Long live the shitstorm.
Well, that's the opposite.
Right.
Sentiment.
Gotta watch out for those people.
Those people.
Right? We've done it. We've done it again.
Those people.
Let the cycle return.
Oh, those people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, damn those people.
They are the worst, always. Whoever they is, they're the worst.
And
We are not the worst.
And if you're not into doing something, well, that's exactly what they said you wouldn't be into doing.
Yeah.
That's another
You must be one of them.
movie reference, by the way. You should watch it.
It's a classic trap.
Bender's Big Game. Well, that's what they said you would say.
Right.
What's this petition about? I don't know. Animals? I don't like giving away my email address to strangers. That's exactly what they said you would say. They
Right.
did. Well, let me at this. It's a good movie.
Mm-hmm. Training is good. Lets you
So-
know what they said.
So yeah, we have the workings of a diagram, don't we?
I don't know. Do we? I posted some.
It's a tether in the form of a hurricane or tornado.
Okay.
We have our
Oh, all right. We out of here.
mm-mm.
Final words.
Well, I need a minute.
Any last words for the stream?
I think we did a decent job of like trying to visualize a 3D model of what we're talking about a tether.
Should just do all our charts in 3D. I got this.
We're talking about like the horizon between the concrete and the narrative, which this tether is effectively meant to represent. We're tying together a number of different diagrams from anywhere from the ontological matrix to the dream to the moment diagram. So there's lots going
Right.
on here.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
there's an expression of neurosis and psychosis that is tied into all of this, and we're looking at it as the ground and the sky.
And I like that kind of overall theme, I guess, or like revelation of recent about the uncertainty, like the left and right divide as being
Yeah.
divided.
Yeah. So the connection between incompleteness and contradiction.
Right.
The more complete you get, the more contradictory you get. The less complete you get, the less complete you get.
So the right is being contradictory, the left is being incomplete, as a way of looking at viewing the divide. And I found them powerful in my own thinking, but it's obviously
And also
to
to
engage in.
make a distinction between the idealistic left and right situation versus the current expressed situation where left and right are sitting squarely on the right hand side of left and right of the idealistic divide. So
Right. So in other words, you have these, let's say, authoritarian tendencies of censorship, and like it must be this way, and like
Mhm.
regimented like punishments,
And you don't hear any
Clamp
other,
down.
and you don't have any other
and that's
non-authoritarian.
the whole
rhetoric.
spectrum is like just that.
Right, which makes it squarely on the right because you
And
don't
so
hear
even
anything.
where is the left, as in where is the progressive, we would say in model terms,
Right.
or newly appropriated.
Like how
I'm
do
saying progressive as idealistic, not in a negative connotation, as well as conservative, which has a traditionalist sort of connotation, but both needing each other.
it's more like how do you reutilize what's been conserved for new purposes? That's the question of the progression. And if the answer is
Right,
in
yeah,
no
sure.
way at all, that's when you don't have progression. When you still ask the
I
question
guess.
in pretense, but you don't have any answer.
Yeah. So you're trying to ask the question of what is conserved, as in what is the inside and what is the outside, as this is the major boundary.
Right. And if nothing shifts this boundary in
We
any
should,
way,
probably call it finals words and pack
Somebody
the F up.
downstairs already?
Yeah, we're jetting out of here. So appreciate all of you Portal Mountaineers and Hellenic modelers, etc. We'll catch you in meeting 85, which will be in 2 weeks, likely. We'll see.
do you have any other plans?
No, we'll be here. Anyways, yeah, usually 12 Eastern, maybe 1.
Nice.
Alright, Sundays, yep.
Irie.
Good times. Alright, peace out. Might as well get the final shot. Is it gonna be the... I'm out. Am I? No, I'm not. I've got a couple sips. Dun dun dun, development beat.
Love you, bro.
And with that, likewise,